My mother-in-law replaced all my photos in their family home with pictures of my husband's ex-girlfriend. She'd introduced the ex as the daughter I should have had at gatherings. When she gave my engagement ring to the ex at Christmas dinner, I congratulated them both graciously. Her next family announcement would be far less celebratory. The sound of my engagement ring hitting the mahogany table was barely audible over the Christmas music playing softly in the background, but to me it rang like a gunshot. My mother-in-law's manicured fingers pushed the diamond solitaire across the polished surface with deliberate precision, sliding it directly into the outstretched palm of my husband's ex-girlfriend like she was passing a communion wafer. "This belongs with someone who truly appreciates family," she announced, her voice carrying that saccharine tone she reserved for moments when she wanted to appear generous while delivering a knife to the heart. "Before we continue with this story of quiet revenge, I want to thank you for being here with me. If you believe that women deserve respect in their families and shouldn't have to endure betrayal in silence, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to know they're not alone in these struggles." Now, let's see how I turned their cruelty into my greatest strength. The dining room, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of post-Christmas dinner conversation, fell into a silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Uncle Robert's fork froze halfway to his mouth, still laden with pumpkin pie. My sister-in-law Jennifer's eyes went wide behind her reading glasses, darting between me and the unfolding scene like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. Even the children, who had been arguing over the last dinner roll moments before, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere and fell quiet. But I had been expecting this moment for weeks. The signs had been building all evening like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. During appetizers, my mother-in-law had made a point of seating the ex-girlfriend, Sarah, in what used to be my traditional spot beside the Christmas tree. When we gathered for family photos before dinner, she had somehow maneuvered me to the very edge of the group while positioning Sarah front and center, her arm draped possessively around my husband's waist. Most telling of all was the way she kept glancing at me throughout the meal, waiting for some reaction, some sign that I was finally ready to break. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady and warm as summer honey. "It's absolutely beautiful on you, Sarah. It looks like it was meant for your hand." The words came out so naturally, so genuinely pleased, that even I was impressed by my own performance. I had practiced this moment in my bathroom mirror for 3 weeks, perfecting the exact tone of gracious defeat that would satisfy my mother-in-law's need to see me crumble while protecting my own dignity. Sarah's face flushed pink as she slipped the ring onto her finger. My ring finger, the same finger that had worn it for 4 years of marriage. She looked genuinely surprised by my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or protests or at least some visible sign of distress. Instead, I smiled and raised my wine glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings," I said, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. "And to family." Jennifer shot me a look that was equal parts admiration and concern. She knew me well enough to recognize that my calm acceptance was more dangerous than any tantrum could have been. Her husband David cleared his throat uncomfortably and mumbled something about checking on the game in the living room, eager to escape the mounting tension. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, though he didn't know it yet, sat frozen in his chair like a deer caught in headlights. His mother had orchestrated this entire scene without consulting him, and I could see the panic beginning to creep into his features as he realized he was now complicit in something he hadn't explicitly agreed to. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, searching for words that wouldn't come. The ring had been missing from my jewelry box for 3 months. When I'd asked about it, he'd mumbled something about having it cleaned and resized, a story so obviously fabricated that I hadn't bothered to challenge it. Instead, I'd done what any reasonable person would do in the digital age. I'd tracked down the receipt and called the jeweler myself. The ring hadn't been cleaned or resized. It had been picked up by his mother in September, accompanied by a woman matching Sarah's description. That phone call had been my wake-up moment, the instant I stopped being a victim and started being a strategist. "The ring was getting too loose on my finger anyway," I continued conversationally, taking another sip of wine. "Funny how things change when you lose weight from stress, isn't it? But it fits you perfectly, Sarah. Like it was always meant to be yours." My mother-in-law's smile faltered slightly. She had expected resistance, maybe even a scene that would justify her actions and paint me as the unstable, emotional wife who couldn't handle her son's happiness. Instead, my gracious acceptance was throwing off her entire script. Sarah twisted the ring nervously, the diamonds catching the light from the chandelier above. I didn't know you hadn't. I mean, she said you'd given it back willingly. Oh, but I did, I replied smoothly, meeting my mother-in-law's eyes directly. In a way. Sometimes we give things up without realizing we're doing it. Sometimes we're so focused on keeping peace that we forget to fight for what's ours. The double meaning hung in the air like incense, sweet and suffocating. Around the table, family members began to find excuses to leave. The children drifted toward the living room and their new toys. The men gravitated toward the football game on television. The women started clearing dishes with unusual efficiency, suddenly desperate to have something to do with their hands. But I remained seated, calmly finishing my dessert while my world officially ended. You know what I love most about Christmas? I mused aloud, addressing no one in particular. It's how it brings out people's true nature. All the pretending stops and you finally see who everyone really is beneath the wrapping paper and good intentions. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. She wasn't stupid, she could hear the steel beneath my silk, the warning wrapped in Christmas sentiment. Family is everything to me, she said, her voice taking on that self-righteous tone she used when she wanted to appear noble. And sometimes family means making difficult decisions for the greater good. Absolutely, I agreed, standing to help clear the table. Family means knowing who truly belongs and who's just visiting. It means understanding the difference between blood loyalty and earned respect. Most importantly, it means remembering that every action has consequences. As I stacked plates and gathered silverware, I could feel the weight of their stares. Sarah kept touching the ring like a talisman, perhaps beginning to understand that she hadn't won a prize so much as inherited a burden. My husband looked increasingly uncomfortable, finally realizing that his mother had just blown up his marriage without consulting him first. But it was my mother-in-law's expression that satisfied me most. For the first time in our relationship, I saw uncertainty flicker across her features. She had expected me to crumble, to storm out, to give her the dramatic exit that would justify her actions to the rest of the family. Instead, I was still here, still smiling, still playing the perfect daughter-in-law even as she handed my marriage to another woman. That uncertainty was the first crack in her armor, and I intended to widen it until the whole structure came tumbling down. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside my silent husband, I stared at the ceiling and felt something cold and calculating settle into place where my heart used to be. Not anger. Anger was hot and unpredictable and ultimately self-destructive. This was something far more dangerous. Absolute clarity about who these people really were and what they were capable of. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every family gathering where Sarah was mysteriously invited. Every conversation about what's best for everyone. Every photo quietly removed from the mantle and replaced with memories that didn't include me. They had been erasing me systematically, counting on my politeness and my desire to keep peace to smooth their path. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that because I didn't fight back I was weak. They confused kindness with naivety, grace with surrender. Tomorrow I would begin teaching them the difference. The ring was gone, but that was just the beginning. They wanted to play games with family loyalty and belonging. They wanted to see how far they could push before I broke. I smiled in the darkness, already planning my first move. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The phone sat in my hands for 30 minutes before I finally dialed her number. 2 weeks had passed since Christmas dinner, enough time for the initial shock to settle into something more useful, strategic thinking. I had spent those 14 days studying Sarah's social media profiles, learning her patterns, understanding what made her tick. Single mother, recently unemployed from a marketing firm, living in a cramped apartment with her 8-year-old daughter. Most importantly, increasingly dependent on my mother-in-law's financial support. Sarah. I let my voice crack slightly, just enough to suggest I'd been crying. It's me. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. The pause on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Oh. Hi. How did you get my number? From the family contact list, I replied, which was true. I've been thinking about Christmas dinner, about what happened. About how surprised you looked when she gave you the ring. Another pause. I could practically hear her mental wheels turning, trying to figure out if this was a trap. I want you to know I'm not angry with you, I continued, letting exhaustion seep into my voice. I think we're both being manipulated here, and I need someone who understands what it's like to deal with her. The shift in her breathing told me I'd hit the right note. You think she's manipulating me? Sarah, you've known her for how long? 6 years. 7. Has she ever, in all that time, done something that didn't somehow benefit her in the end? The silence stretched longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. She said you'd given the ring back willingly. That you understood it belonged with someone who really loved the family. Did that seem like something I'd do? I asked gently. Give up my engagement ring without a fight? Or did it seem like something she'd orchestrate to make herself look generous while getting rid of me? I could hear her shifting in her chair, maybe pacing. I mean, she's been so good to me and Emma. She pays for Emma's dance classes, helps with groceries when money's tight. And what does she ask for in return? I pressed. Your presence at every family gathering? Your agreement with everything she says? Your willingness to be the daughter she never had while I'm standing right there? The sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck home. Look, I said, softening my tone, I don't want to fight with you. We're both just trying to survive in her world. Maybe we could talk in person? Somewhere away from all the family drama, where we can be honest with each other. An hour later, I was driving 43 minutes out of town to a generic coffee chain where nobody would recognize either of us. I'd chosen the location carefully, far enough from familiar territory that Sarah would feel safe speaking freely, busy enough that our conversation would be lost in the ambient noise, but quiet enough that I could control the mood. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a large latte with extra foam, picking at a blueberry muffin. Without makeup and designer clothes, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from constantly worrying about money and trying to be perfect for people who hold your security in their hands. Thank you for coming, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. I know this is weird. It's definitely weird, she agreed, but her smile was genuine. I wasn't sure what to expect. I ordered my own coffee, a simple black coffee, nothing fancy, and let the silence settle between us while I studied her face. Up close, I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone for messages from Emma's school or potential employers. Can I ask you something honestly? I said finally. When she handed you that ring, did you know she hadn't told me it was happening? Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. I suspected. But she made it sound like it was already decided, like you'd agreed to it as part of some kind of divorce settlement. We're not getting divorced, I said carefully. At least there's been no discussion of it. The ring just disappeared from my jewelry box 3 months ago. Her eyes widened. She told me you'd given it back because you realized it should go to someone who understood the family legacy. What family legacy? The money. The investments. She said there were family traditions about who inherits what, and that I needed to understand my place in all of it if I was going to be part of the family. I felt my pulse quicken. This was better than I'd hoped. What kind of investments? Sarah glanced around nervously as if someone might be listening. She mentioned that your father-in-law had set up some kind of trust fund before he died. Overseas accounts, property investments, that sort of thing. She said it was complicated, that there were tax reasons why it had to be kept quiet. I leaned back in my chair, letting surprise cross my features. She told you about the overseas accounts? You know about them? I only found out recently, I whispered, leaning forward conspiratorially. I was going through some of his old papers in the attic, looking for our wedding photos that she claimed were somewhere safe. I found bank statements, account numbers, investment portfolios. Sir, there's so much money. Way more than anyone realizes. Her eyes went sharp with interest. How much money? I pulled out my phone and showed her a carefully doctored screenshot. A bank statement I'd created using my basic design skills and a legitimate bank's formatting. The account balance showed $847,000 in a Cayman Islands account under my late father-in-law's name. This is just one account, I said quietly. There are 4 others that I found. She's been living off the interest for years, telling everyone that his pension and social security are barely covering her expenses. Sarah stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She's been crying poverty while sitting on almost $1 million? More than that. Much more. I put my phone away, letting the image burn into her memory. And she's been using it to control everyone. Your dance classes for Emma? Your grocery money? She could afford to set you up for life, but instead she gives you just enough to keep you grateful and dependent. That. Sarah's voice trailed off as pieces started falling into place in her mind. That manipulative witch. Now you see why I think we're both being used, I said gently. She pits us against each other, makes us compete for scraps of her attention and approval, while she hoards resources that should benefit the whole family. Sarah's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her latte. Emma's been asking for a bike for months. A used one from the thrift store cost $60 and I told her we couldn't afford it. Meanwhile, she's been sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars. The worst part is she's probably planning to cut us both out entirely, I continued. Think about it, she gives you my ring, makes you feel special and chosen, but has she mentioned anything about including you in her will? Has she talked about Emma's college fund, or your future security? The look on Sarah's face told me everything I needed to know. We need to protect ourselves, I said firmly. Both of us. And Emma deserves better than this. 2 weeks later, Sarah called me from her lawyer's office. The legal papers had been filed that morning. A formal demand for her rightful share of the estate, backed by the documents I'd helped her discover, and the testimony of neighbors who'd witnessed years of her being treated like family. My mother-in-law's phone started ringing that afternoon and it didn't stop for days. The phone calls started that afternoon. Hysterical, rambling conversations where my mother-in-law demanded that anyone make sense of what was happening to her. Sarah's lawyer had delivered the inheritance papers personally, showing up at her front door with a briefcase full of legal documents and a smile that promised expensive complications. But I was already 3 steps ahead, having spent the past week researching every gift Sarah had given my mother-in-law over the past year. The Louis Vuitton handbag for Mother's Day. The Mikimoto pearl necklace for her birthday. The Hermes silk scarf she'd worn to church every Sunday since receiving it. Each piece had been carefully chosen, expensive enough to demonstrate devotion, classic enough to appeal to my mother-in-law's traditional tastes. My divorce attorney had mentioned a man named Marcus during our initial consultation, not as someone I'd need, but as a cautionary tale about what happened when custody battles got ugly. He specializes in creating evidence, she'd said with distaste. Fake texts, doctored photos, that sort of thing. I refuse to work with people like that, but he exists. It had taken me 2 days to track down Marcus through a chain of referrals that led from family lawyers to private investigators to the kinds of people who advertised discreet services on websites that looked like they belonged in the early 2000s. His office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. I need exact replicas of these items, I'd told him, spreading photos across his cluttered desk. But with modifications. Marcus was a thin man with nervous energy and ink-stained fingers who asked no questions about why someone would want replica designer goods that had been deliberately damaged. He quoted me a price that would have made me wince 6 months ago, but now felt like a worthwhile investment in psychological warfare. The modifications will take extra time, he'd warned. Especially if you want them to look authentic but disturbing. I want them to look like they were made by someone who loves her but has lost their mind, I'd replied. 3 weeks later, the first package arrived at my mother-in-law's house on a Tuesday morning when I knew she'd be alone. I'd been tracking her schedule through her social media posts and Jennifer's casual mentions of her activities. Yoga class on Mondays and Thursdays, grocery shopping on Wednesdays, bridge club on Fridays. Tuesdays were her hermit days, when she stayed home to clean and organize and generally prepare for the rest of the week. The Chanel bag looked perfect from a distance. Same quilted patterns, same gold chain, same leather texture. But Marcus had worked his magic in the details. The corners showed what appeared to be dried blood, dark brown stains that could have been anything but suggested something terrible. The interior smelled faintly of copper and decay, achieved through a combination of chemicals I didn't want to know about. The accompanying note was written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, which I'd practiced for hours using samples from her legal documents and old birthday cards I'd found while helping clean out family storage boxes. You wanted me to be family, it read in blue ink that matched Sarah's preferred pen. Now you'll never forget me. I knew she'd received it when her first panicked phone call came that evening. Someone sent me something horrible, she told Jennifer, who immediately called me to relay the conversation. It looks like Sarah's bag, but it's been tampered with. There's something wrong with it. Maybe it's a manufacturing defect? Jennifer had suggested, playing her role perfectly without knowing she was part of my plan. No, this is deliberate. This is someone trying to scare me. The second package arrived the following Tuesday. The pearl necklace, now with several pearls replaced with what looked like human teeth. The dental work was convincing enough to pass casual inspection but disturbing enough to trigger deep unease. The clasp had been altered to leave marks on skin, tiny scratches that would heal but remain memorable. This time my mother-in-law didn't call Jennifer. She called the police. Officer Martinez was patient and professional when he responded to her complaint about threatening packages, but I could see the skepticism in his report when Jennifer showed it to me later. Without evidence of who was sending the packages, and with no explicit threats contained in the notes, there wasn't much the police could do beyond filing a report and suggesting she install security cameras. Has she been having any disputes with family members? Officer Martinez had asked, apparently unaware of the irony. Just the usual family drama, my mother-in-law had replied, probably not mentioning the inheritance lawsuit currently destroying her relationship with her chosen daughter. The third package was my masterpiece. The silk scarf had been rewoven with strands of Sarah's actual hair, collected during my reconnaissance visits to her salon. I'd posed as a potential client, complimenting the stylist's work on Sarah's color treatment while discreetly gathering the hair clippings that ended up in my purse. Marcus had somehow managed to incorporate them into the scarf's pattern so subtly that you had to look closely to notice. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. The note this time was longer, more unhinged. Every thread connects us now. Every breath you take breathes me in. Family forever. My mother-in-law's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. Sunday dinner that week was supposed to be a celebration of my nephew's acceptance to college, but it turned into a battlefield when my mother-in-law arrived carrying a plastic bag full of altered gifts and accusations. "Look at what you've been sending me," she screamed at Sarah before anyone had even finished saying grace. "Look at these sick, twisted things." Sarah stared at the items spread across the dining room table, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and genuine fear. "I didn't send these. I don't know what these are. Don't lie to me. It's your handwriting. Your hair. Your sick way of trying to get into my head." The entire family watched in stunned silence as my mother-in-law ranted about psychological warfare and mind games, waving the modified scarf like evidence in a trial. Sarah's protests of innocence only seemed to fuel her conviction that she was being gaslit by someone she trusted. "You want my money so badly that you're trying to drive me insane," my mother-in-law continued, her voice reaching a pitch that made the children start crying. "You think if you scare me enough I'll just hand everything over. I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah shot back, tears streaming down her face. "I gave you those gifts because I love you. I would never do something like this." My husband finally found his voice, placing a hand on his mother's arm. "Mom, maybe you should sit down. Take a breath." She shook him off violently. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to make me look crazy so you'll all side with her." I watched it all unfold from my seat at the far end of the table, occasionally offering concerned looks and gentle murmurs about how stress can make people see things differently. When Jennifer asked if I thought they should call someone, a doctor, a therapist, anyone, I suggested that maybe everyone just needed some space to process what was happening. The dinner ended with Sarah storming out, my mother-in-law barricading herself in the guest bathroom, and the rest of the family standing around looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Later, as we drove home in silence, my husband finally spoke. "Do you think Mom is losing it?" I reached over and squeezed his hand sympathetically. "I think she's under a lot of pressure lately. The lawsuit, the family tensions. Maybe she just needs professional help." He nodded slowly, probably already planning conversations with his siblings about intervention and elder care. I smiled in the darkness, knowing that the foundation of their relationship was cracked beyond repair. The conversations about my mother-in-law's mental health started that Monday morning, whispered phone calls between siblings who were finally admitting what they'd all been thinking. Jennifer called me first, her voice heavy with exhaustion and concern. "David thinks we should look into assisted living facilities," she said without preamble. "Not immediately, but maybe start researching options. Last night it was really bad." I made appropriate sounds of sympathy while mentally calculating my next move. The family was fracturing exactly as I'd planned, but I needed one final push to ensure my mother-in-law's complete isolation. Something decisive that would eliminate any possibility of her recovering her standing in their eyes. What kind of timeline are you thinking? I asked, injecting just the right amount of reluctant practicality into my voice. I don't know. She won't talk to any of us. She's convinced we're all conspiring against her with Sarah, which is insane because Sarah hasn't spoken to any of us since Sunday. Perfect. The paranoia was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside Marcus's office for 20 minutes before finally going inside. What I was about to do crossed a line I'd never imagined approaching, but my mother-in-law had forced this escalation when she chose to humiliate me publicly at Christmas dinner. I need something that looks like a debt collection notice, I told him, sliding a manila folder across his desk. Official letterhead, legal language, the works. Marcus examined my rough draft. A document claiming Sarah had loaned my mother-in-law $180,000 over the past 2 years, with interest and penalties bringing the total to nearly $200,000. The language was deliberately vague about the nature of the loans, suggesting everything from gambling debts to secret business investments. This is getting into fraud territory, Marcus warned, his fingers drumming nervously on his desk. Fake debt collection notices can trigger federal investigations. It's not fraud if it never gets filed with any official agency, I replied calmly. It's just a piece of paper designed to scare someone who's already paranoid. He quoted me a price that was triple his usual fee, clearly hoping I'd back down. Instead, I counted out cash from my emergency fund, money I'd been secretly saving for exactly this kind of situation. The document he produced 3 days later was a masterpiece of intimidation. Official-looking letterhead for Midwest Recovery Solutions, complete with case numbers and legal references that would check out if anyone bothered to verify them. The language was threatening without being overtly illegal, demanding immediate payment and threatening further collection actions if the debt wasn't resolved within 10 days. But the document was only half the plan. The other half required a different kind of contact, one that Marcus was reluctant to provide even after I'd paid him. These guys don't work for people like you, he said, scribbling a phone number on the back of a business card. They usually deal with actual debt collection, repo work, that kind of thing. They're not actors. I just need them to knock on a door and hand over some paperwork, I said. Nothing violent, nothing illegal. Just intimidation. The man who answered when I called had a voice like gravel in a cement mixer. He listened to my request without interruption, quoted me a price that made Marcus's fees look reasonable, and agreed to visit my mother-in-law's house the following Tuesday. We knock, we deliver the papers, we leave, he said. If she doesn't answer, we tape it to the door and go. That's it. That's all I need, I assured him, though some part of me wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Tuesday afternoon found me parked 3 houses down from my mother-in-law's, ostensibly reading a book while actually watching for the arrival of my hired intimidators. I'd planned to simply drive by afterward and observe her reaction to finding the notice, but curiosity got the better of me. The 2 men who showed up looked exactly like what central casting would order for threatening debt collectors. One tall and thin, one broad and stocky, both wearing dark suits that had seen better days. They walked up to her front door with the confident stride of people accustomed to delivering bad news. I watched them knock. Wait. Knock again, louder this time. My mother-in-law's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. But after the past few weeks of mysterious packages and family drama, she'd apparently decided that answering the door was no longer safe. The men waited for exactly 3 minutes, I timed it, before the shorter one produced what looked like a lock-pick set from his jacket pocket. That wasn't part of the plan. I watched in growing horror as they actually opened her front door and disappeared inside the house. This was supposed to be simple intimidation, not breaking and entering. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, unsure whether to call the police or my own attorney. The sounds reached me even through my closed car windows. Crashes, shouting, the unmistakable noise of furniture being overturned. Whatever they were doing in there had escalated far beyond delivering paperwork. When my mother-in-law's front door burst open 15 minutes later, she stumbled out wearing only her nightgown, her hair wild and her voice raised in a scream that carried across the entire neighborhood. Help me. Someone help me. They're destroying everything. The 2 men emerged calmly behind her, walking to their car as if nothing unusual had happened. They drove away before the first neighbor appeared on their porch to investigate the commotion. I sat frozen in my car, watching as my mother-in-law collapsed on her front lawn, sobbing and gesturing wildly at her house. Mrs. Patterson from next door was the first to reach her, wrapping a bathrobe around her shoulders and pulling out her phone to call for help. When the police arrived, my mother-in-law was nearly incoherent. Between gasps and tears, she tried to explain about debt collectors and legal documents and people trying to frame her, but the story sounded like the ravings of someone having a complete mental breakdown. Officer Martinez was among the responding officers, and I could see him exchanging meaningful looks with his partner as my mother-in-law rambled about family conspiracies and fake inheritances. "Ma'am, you mentioned debt collectors," Officer Martinez said patiently. "Do you have any documentation about debts you owe?" That's when my mother-in-law realized her trap. She couldn't produce the fake debt notice without explaining the fake inheritance lawsuit. She couldn't explain why legitimate debt collectors would break into her house without admitting that maybe they weren't legitimate. Every answer led to questions she couldn't answer without revealing the web of lies I'd helped create around her. "It's all connected," she kept saying, her voice rising with frustration. "The packages, the lawsuit, the money. Someone is trying to drive me crazy and nobody believes me." The irony was that she was absolutely right, but she'd spent so many weeks appearing paranoid and unstable that the truth sounded like delusion. I watched the police take their report, saw them examining the damage inside her house through the open front door. Someone had indeed carved "thief" into her antique dining table, along with several other words I couldn't make out from my distance. Her living room looked like a hurricane had passed through it. When Jennifer's car pulled up an hour later, I finally drove away. I'd seen enough to know that my mother-in-law's credibility was permanently destroyed. Whatever story she told about debt collectors and break-ins would be filtered through her family's growing conviction that she was losing her mind. That night, I lay in bed listening to my husband's side of the phone conversation with his sister, their voices heavy with the weight of decisions no adult child wants to make. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," he said. "She needs professional help and she needs it now." I closed my eyes and smiled in the darkness, finally feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and total vindication. The satisfaction I felt watching my husband hang up the phone lasted exactly 12 hours before reality set in. I had crossed lines I couldn't uncross, done things that would horrify the woman I used to be. But as I sat in my kitchen the next morning, drinking coffee and scrolling through Sarah's increasingly desperate social media posts, I realized I wasn't done yet. Her Instagram story from Tuesday night showed a hastily packed suitcase and a caption that read, "Sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses. New city, new life, new beginning. Hashtag fresh start, hashtag toxic free, hashtag movingin." Within an hour, I'd called the airline's customer service line, pretending to be her concerned friend who needed to know her flight details to pick her up at her destination. The script I'd prepared was convincing: worried friend, family emergency, urgent contact needed. The customer service representative was sympathetic enough to confirm that Sarah Chin had a reservation on Flight 447 to Phoenix, departing Thursday at 2:15 p.m. Phoenix made sense. Her sister lived there, the one who'd been sending occasional supportive comments on Sarah's posts throughout this entire ordeal. Sarah was running home to regroup, probably planning to reinvent herself somewhere nobody knew about the inheritance lawsuit or the debt collection drama. But I couldn't let her leave with a clean slate, not after everything she'd put me through. The ring on her finger, my ring, was just the beginning of what she'd taken from me. She'd stolen my place in the family, my husband's attention, my mother-in-law's affection. She deserved to understand what public humiliation felt like, what it was like to have strangers stare and whisper and judge. That evening, I drove to Marcus's office one final time. The strip mall was nearly empty at 7 p.m., just the nail salon still open with one customer getting a late pedicure. "I need one more favor," I told him, placing the remaining altered jewelry box on his desk. This was the piece de resistance, a small Tiffany box that originally contained earrings, now modified with his signature touch. The foul smell emanating from it was somehow worse than the others, sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in water. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Marcus asked, clearly uncomfortable with how far our arrangement had evolved. "Nothing. I just need to borrow it for a few hours tomorrow." He stared at me for a long moment, probably seeing something in my expression that made him nervous. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm starting to think." "You're starting to think what?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. That maybe you shouldn't have taken cash payments for creating fake evidence? That maybe you should have asked more questions about why someone needed replica designer goods that smelled like death. His mouth shut with an audible click. We both knew he was too deep in this to start developing a conscience now. Thursday morning I dressed carefully, business casual, nothing memorable, the kind of outfit that would blend into any airport crowd. I arrived at the departure terminal 2 hours before Sarah's flight, giving myself plenty of time to observe her check-in routine and identify the perfect moment for my final act. She looked terrible. Even from across the departure hall, I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she kept checking her phone for messages that probably weren't coming. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt that suggested she'd slept in it. Emma wasn't with her, which meant she'd either left her daughter with relatives or, more likely, couldn't afford to bring her along on this escape attempt. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Whatever else Sarah had done, Emma was innocent in all this. I watched Sarah struggle with her oversized suitcase at the check-in kiosk, clearly flustered by the weight restrictions and additional fees. When she stepped away to reorganize her belongings, I made my move. The departures area was crowded enough that nobody paid attention to one middle-aged woman briefly approaching an unattended suitcase. The jewelry box slipped into the outer pocket of her carry-on bag like it belonged there, nestled between what looked like phone chargers and travel documents. Then I found a seat in the departure lounge cafe, ordered a latte I didn't want, and opened a magazine I couldn't focus on. The wait was excruciating. Sarah made it through the initial security checkpoint without incident, and for a moment I wondered if my plan had failed. Maybe they wouldn't search her bag. Maybe the smell wasn't strong enough to trigger suspicion. Maybe I'd spent weeks orchestrating this elaborate revenge only to watch her fly away untouched. But then I saw the TSA agent wrinkle his nose as Sarah's bag went through the scanner. "Ma'am, we need to do a secondary screening of your carry-on," he announced, pulling her bag aside. Sarah's confusion was genuine. She had no idea what they might find. I watched her face cycle through puzzlement, then concern, then dawning horror as the agent opened the outer pocket and the smell hit him full force. "What is this?" he demanded, holding the jewelry box at arm's length. I don't know," Sarah stammered. "I've never seen that before in my life." The lie was technically true, but it sounded exactly like what someone would say if they'd been caught smuggling something illegal. Within minutes, additional security personnel had arrived, and Sarah was being escorted to a private screening room. I couldn't hear the conversation from my position in the cafe, but I could see Sarah's increasingly frantic gestures through the glass partition. She was trying to explain something, probably the inheritance lawsuit, the debt collection incident, the recent family drama. But the more she talked, the more suspicious she appeared. Airport security doesn't care about family feuds or civil lawsuits. They care about potential threats to aviation security, and a woman traveling with mysteriously altered items that reeked of decay fit their profile of someone worth investigating thoroughly. When they missed her boarding call by 40 minutes, I knew my plan had succeeded. The questioning lasted for hours. I ordered another coffee, bought a newspaper, and settled in to watch the aftermath unfold. Sarah's social media updates began around hour 3. Increasingly desperate posts about being detained for no reason, and framed by people who want to destroy my life. Her friends' responses were initially supportive, but as the details of her situation became clearer, the tone shifted. Questions about why someone would be carrying suspicious items at an airport. Speculation about what kind of family drama could escalate to this level. Gradual distancing from someone whose problems were clearly more complicated than a simple custody dispute or inheritance disagreement. By the time security finally released her 12 hours later, Sarah's reputation was as damaged as my mother-in-law's. Her missed flight had cost her money she couldn't afford to lose. Her social media presence was flooded with questions she couldn't answer without sounding paranoid or delusional. Most importantly, she now understood exactly what I'd felt sitting at that Christmas dinner table. The humiliation of being powerless while people around you made decisions about your life. The frustration of knowing the truth but being unable to make anyone believe it. As I finally left the airport that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. Perfect, complete justice. Not the legal kind that takes years and costs fortunes, but the immediate personal kind that comes from watching someone reap exactly what they've sown. Sarah would eventually make it to Phoenix, But she'd arrive carrying baggage that had nothing to do with airlines and everything to do with the choices she'd made when she decided to steal someone else's life. The drive home from the airport took me through the old neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where I'd learned that fairness was something you had to fight for, not something that was handed to you. I parked outside my childhood home for 20 minutes, watching a different family live in the space where I'd once believed the world was fundamentally just. That little girl who'd cried when other kids cut in line or took her lunch money would barely recognize the woman I'd become. But she'd be proud of me. 3 weeks later, my husband appeared on my doorstep with grocery store flowers and the kind of wounded expression he'd perfected during our marriage whenever he needed forgiveness for something he couldn't quite bring himself to acknowledge. He'd waited, I realized, for the worst of the storm to pass. Sarah was gone, his mother was in therapy, and the family had collectively decided to pretend the entire inheritance fiasco had been a misunderstanding caused by stress and grief. "Can I come in?" he asked, shifting the bouquet from one hand to the other like he wasn't sure what to do with it. I stepped aside and let him enter, noting how he paused in the entryway to take in the changes I'd made to my house. The family photos were gone from the mantel, replaced with art I'd chosen myself. The furniture had been rearranged to create conversation areas that felt more like a sanctuary than a showplace. Everything about the space now reflected my taste rather than the compromise aesthetic that had defined our marriage. "The place looks good," he said carefully. "Different but good." I waited for him to continue, offering neither encouragement nor resistance. He'd come here with a speech prepared, probably rehearsed in his car during the drive over, and I was curious to hear how he planned to rewrite our history. "I know I messed up," he began, settling into the chair that used to be his favorite. "I should have defended you better. I should have seen what my mother was doing and put a stop to it." I replied non-committally, taking a seat across from him rather than beside him. "The thing is, I never wanted any of this to happen. The ring, Sarah, all the family drama. I got caught in the middle and didn't know how to handle it." He was trying to position himself as another victim of his mother's manipulation, I realized. In his version of events, we'd both been pawns in her game rather than him being a willing participant in my systematic erasure from the family. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately," he continued, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "About what we had before everything got so complicated. The new engagement ring was larger than my original, more expensive, probably chosen to demonstrate the sincerity of his apology through carat weight. He set it on the coffee table between us like an offering. "I want to try again," he said. "If you'll have me." I stared at the ring for a long moment, letting him marinate in the silence. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the grand gesture that was supposed to sweep away months of betrayal and neglect. He was counting on my capacity for forgiveness, banking on the idea that I was still the woman who'd absorbed years of small humiliations in the name of keeping peace. "That's beautiful," I said finally. "She must have expensive taste." His face went through several expressions before settling on confusion. "She? Your mother? I assume she picked this one out too, the way she picked out Sarah's Christmas present." The color drained from his cheeks. "I chose this myself. Mom had nothing to do with it." "Did you though?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or did you choose it the way you chose to give her my original ring for safekeeping? The way you chose to stay silent while she erased me from your family photos? The way you chose to let Sarah take my seat at dinner tables for months?" He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. We both knew the truth. His choices had always been about avoiding conflict with his mother, never about protecting me. "I can't undo what happened," he said finally. "But I can promise it won't happen again." I picked up the ring box and examined it more closely. The diamond was beautiful, flawless, the kind of stone that would make other women envious at social gatherings. Everything a proper engagement ring should be. "The problem with promises," I said, closing the box with a soft click, "is that they require trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself because someone brings flowers and jewelry." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd been redesigning since the divorce papers were filed. My lawyer had been surprised when I'd insisted on keeping the house. It was more than I could easily afford alone. But I'd needed something that was entirely mine, a space where nobody else's opinions or preferences held any weight. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice smaller now. "I'm saying I'll think about it." And I did think about it for exactly the length of time it took him to drive away. Then I called my therapist and scheduled an extra session for the following week. Dr. Morrison had been the first person to suggest that maybe my marriage problems weren't actually about communication or compromise. Some people drain energy from others, she'd said during our third session. They take until you don't recognize yourself anymore. The question isn't whether you can fix the relationship, it's whether you want to go back to being the person you were in it. I didn't. My husband kept calling after that, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and gradually became more demanding. Why wasn't I answering? When would I give him a real answer? Didn't he deserve better than this silent treatment after everything he'd been through with his family? The entitlement in that last message made me laugh out loud. Everything he'd been through. As if he'd been the victim of his mother's schemes rather than their beneficiary. I changed my phone number the following week. The job offer from the marketing firm in Denver came at exactly the right time. A friend from college had recommended me for the position, and the salary was enough to justify leaving everything familiar behind. When I called to accept, the HR manager seemed pleased by my enthusiasm for starting fresh in a new environment. If only she knew. My mother-in-law's world was shrinking in ways that must have terrified her. Jennifer told me during one of our increasingly rare conversations that their mother was seeing a psychiatrist twice a week and taking medication for anxiety. The inheritance lawsuit had cost her nearly $40,000 in legal fees, money she couldn't afford to lose on her fixed income. She keeps talking about being framed, Jennifer said wearily. The therapist thinks it's a form of paranoid thinking brought on by stress and isolation. That must be difficult for all of you, I replied, injecting just the right amount of sympathy into my voice. The worst part is we can't have normal family gatherings anymore. She gets suspicious if too many people are there, like we're plotting against her. Last Sunday she accused David of recording her conversation with his phone. The family I'd once desperately wanted to belong to was fragmenting exactly as I'd planned, each member retreating into their own protective shells rather than dealing with the toxic dynamics that had always existed beneath the surface of their holiday smiles. Are you still planning to come to Christmas dinner? Jennifer asked hesitantly. I paused, considering. The invitation wasn't extended out of love or genuine desire for my company. It was guilt and social obligation, the same forces that had kept me trapped in their orbit for years. But now I had a choice. I'll try to make it, I said, already knowing I'd cancel at the last minute. Though I might have to work that weekend. The lie came so easily now, smooth as silk and twice as comfortable. That evening, I tried on my original engagement ring for the first time since it had been returned through Sarah's legal proceedings. It fit perfectly the way it always had, but it felt different on my finger. Heavier. Not with sentiment, but with the weight of everything I'd learned about myself in the process of getting it back. I wasn't the same woman who'd worn it innocently for 4 years, believing that love and goodness would eventually triumph over selfishness and manipulation. I was someone harder now, more calculating, less willing to absorb other people's cruelty in the name of keeping peace. Some people might call that damaged. I called it educated. Christmas morning in Denver was different. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes outside my new apartment window, and for the first time in years, I woke up without checking my phone for family drama or obligatory holiday messages. The silence was perfect. Jennifer had called 3 times the night before, each voicemail more desperate than the last. Please come. She keeps asking if you're coming. I think she needs to see you. My mother-in-law was dying. Not dramatically, not from anything I'd caused, but quietly succumbing to the stress-related heart condition that had worsened since her world collapsed. The doctor said she had weeks, maybe a month. I booked a flight that afternoon. The family gathered at Jennifer's house looked like survivors of a natural disaster. My husband sat alone in a corner, the rejected engagement ring probably still sitting in his sock drawer. David avoided eye contact, embarrassed by his mother's public breakdown months earlier. The grandchildren played quietly, sensing the adults' discomfort. And there she was, my mother-in-law, shrunken in a wheelchair by the window. The woman who'd once commanded every room she entered now looked frail and uncertain, her eyes darting nervously whenever someone approached. She saw me before anyone else did. You came, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I walked over and knelt beside her wheelchair, close enough that only she could hear me. Of course I came. We're family, remember? Her eyes searched my face, looking for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or acknowledgement of what she'd put me through. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I brought you something," I said, placing it in her trembling hands. She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers struggling with the paper. Inside was a jewelry box, not one of Marcus's altered pieces, but a simple, elegant container holding my original engagement ring. "I thought you should have this back," I said quietly, "since you seem to think it belonged to your family." She stared at the ring, her breath coming in short gasps. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." I leaned closer, my voice barely a whisper. "You taught me something important about family loyalty. About how people show their true nature when they think no one is watching. About how power works in families like yours." Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. Not the paranoid delusions she'd been grappling with for months, but crystal clear comprehension of exactly who had orchestrated her downfall. "It was you," she breathed. "Merry Christmas," I replied, standing up and smoothing my dress. I stayed for dinner, making pleasant conversation about my new job and apartment. When people asked about my plans, I spoke enthusiastically about starting over, about how liberating it felt to build a life based on my own choices rather than other people's expectations. As I prepared to leave, my mother-in-law caught my arm with surprising strength. "Why?" she asked. I looked down at her, this woman who'd spent years trying to erase me from her son's life, and felt something I'd never expected: pity. "Because you forgot something important," I said gently. "When you push someone hard enough, eventually they stop pulling themselves back up. They learn to push back instead." I walked out of that house for the last time, leaving behind a family that had never truly been mine. In my car, I finally allowed myself to cry, not for what I'd lost but for what I'd found. 3 weeks later, Jennifer called to tell me my mother-in-law had passed peacefully in her sleep. I sent flowers and a sympathy card, but I didn't attend the funeral. Some chapters once closed should stay that way. I never saw any of them again. If this story of calculated revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she handed back that engagement ring, watching her mother-in-law finally realize who destroyed her world. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. On our wedding day, my husband disappeared right before the ceremony. Hours later, I found a note from my own sister. "He's mine now." I was left humiliated and heartbroken. Years later, I received a letter, not from her but from him. "I made a terrible mistake," it read. "Please meet me one last time, before it's too late." The letter trembled in my hands as I read the final line again. "Please meet me one last time, before it's too late." 5 years after he abandoned me at the altar, Eric wanted to see me. But my mind wasn't on his desperate plea. It was catapulting back to that day, the day everything shattered. Before we continue this tale of betrayal and resilience, I want to thank you for joining Emma on her heartbreaking journey. If you're drawn to stories of people overcoming devastating betrayals and finding strength they never knew they had, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more content about women reclaiming their power after unimaginable loss. Now let's return to that fateful wedding day that changed everything. I woke that morning to sunshine streaming through lace curtains, my wedding dress hanging on my childhood bedroom door like a promise. My mother knocked softly, entering with a breakfast tray I was too excited to touch. Her eyes gleamed with tears as she set it down. "My beautiful Emma," she whispered, smoothing my hair. "I can't believe my little girl is marrying her high school sweetheart today." The Turner household buzzed with activity. Florists delivering arrangements of white peonies and blue hydrangeas, my bridesmaids arriving with mimosas and makeup kits, my father pacing nervously in his tuxedo. Everything was perfect, just as I'd planned since Eric proposed under the old oak tree at Miller's Pond. "Has anyone heard from Veronica?" I asked, realizing my sister, my maid of honor, hadn't arrived yet. "She texted that she was picking up something special for you," my cousin Melissa said, helping fasten the pearl buttons down my back. "Said she'd meet us at the church." I didn't think much of it then. Veronica had always been the spontaneous one, the sister who craved more than our small town of Millfield could offer. While I found purpose teaching third graders, she chased bigger dreams, always talking about New York and Paris. But she promised she'd be there for me today, and despite our differences, I trusted her. My mother's hands trembled as she secured my grandmother's pearl-studded veil. Perfect, she breathed, stepping back. The room fell silent as everyone took in the final result. Eric won't know what hit him, my best friend Jenna said, wiping away a tear. Mrs. Sullivan, Eric's mother, arrived as we were preparing to leave. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You've always been the daughter I never had. I'm so happy you're making it official today." The bridal party departed for the church in white-ribboned cars, leaving me alone with my father. He looked at me with such pride it made my throat tight. "Ready to become Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, offering his arm. "I've been ready since 10th grade, I laughed, taking one last glance at my childhood bedroom. The church looked like something from a fairy tale. Pews adorned with blue satin bows, candles flickering in hurricane lamps, sunlight streaming through stained glass. 200 guests filled the sanctuary, practically everyone in Millfield. I waited in the small antechamber, listening to the string quartet play Pachelbel's canon, my heart racing with anticipation. Then came the first sign something was wrong. Pastor Wilson appeared, his brow furrowed. "Emma, the ceremony was scheduled to begin 10 minutes ago, but Eric hasn't arrived yet." "He's probably just running late," I said, though Eric was never late for anything. Maybe there was traffic from his parents' house. Jenna pulled out her phone. "I'll call his best man." The minutes stretched painfully. My father loosened his tie, checking his watch repeatedly. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "I can't reach Mark," Jenna whispered, referring to Eric's best man. "He's not answering." Pastor Wilson cleared his throat. "The guests are getting restless. Should we make an announcement?" "No," I said firmly. "Eric will be here. He has to be." Another 20 minutes passed in increasingly frantic phone calls. My stomach knotted as I heard whispers from the hallway. "Try calling Veronica again," I urged Melissa. "Maybe she knows something." Melissa's expression changed as she dialed. Her phone's going straight to voicemail. "And Emma, she never showed up with whatever she was picking up for you." A horrible thought began forming, too terrible to acknowledge. I shook my head to dispel it. Mrs. Sullivan burst into the room, her face ashen. "I just called our house. The housekeeper says Eric came home after the rehearsal dinner, packed a bag and left early this morning. He didn't say where he was going." The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not after 8 years together. "I need to sit down," I whispered. That's when Pastor Wilson entered with an envelope. "Emma, this was just delivered to the church office for you." I recognized the handwriting immediately, Veronica's looping script. With trembling fingers I tore it open and unfolded the note. "He's mine now. Don't try to find us." 5 words that demolished my world. I read them again, unable to process their meaning. The note slipped from my fingers as a strangled sound escaped my throat. My father caught me as my knees buckled. "Emma? What is it?" I couldn't speak. Mrs. Sullivan picked up the note, her face crumpling as she read it. "No," she gasped. "He wouldn't." But he had. My fiancé and my sister. The betrayal so complete it felt like physical pain. What followed remains a blur of humiliation. My father standing before our friends and neighbors, his voice breaking as he announced there would be no wedding today. The collective gasp that echoed through the sanctuary. Mrs. Sullivan collapsing into her husband's arms. The pitying glances, the hushed whispers as guests filed out. Poor Emma. Can you believe Veronica would do such a thing? Always knew that girl was trouble. How will Emma face anyone after this? I sat immobile in my wedding dress, unable to cry, unable to speak as my mother methodically removed the veil and the pins from my hair. It wasn't until later that evening, after I'd changed into sweatpants and sat numb in my childhood bedroom, that the full extent of their betrayal became clear. Eric's father discovered their joint bank account had been emptied the previous day. My mother found Veronica's closet cleared out. Not hastily packed but methodically emptied, suggesting weeks of planning. The final blow came when Mrs. Sullivan called, her voice hollow with shock. "Emma, we found receipts in Eric's trash. 2 one-way tickets to New York, purchased 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. While I'd been writing my vows and choosing flower arrangements, they'd been planning to devastate me. While Eric kissed me goodnight after our rehearsal dinner, promising to see me at the altar, he knew he was lying. I finally broke then, sobs tearing through me until I could barely breathe. My mother held me like she did when I was a child, helpless to ease this adult pain. How could they? I kept asking. How could they do this to me? There was no answer that night, nor in the days that followed. Only the certainty that the two people I had trusted most had conspired to break my heart in the most public, humiliating way possible. Little did I know then that their betrayal was only the beginning of a story far more twisted than I could have imagined. The first day back at Pinewood Elementary tested every ounce of strength I possessed. 6 weeks after what people now called the Patterson-Turner incident, I stood outside my classroom door, gripping my lesson planner until my knuckles turned white. Principal Davis had offered me extended leave. Take all the time you need, Emma. But staying home with my thoughts was worse than facing the whispers. I smoothed my navy dress, took a deep breath and stepped inside. 23 third graders looked up with innocent curiosity, blissfully unaware that their teacher had become the centerpiece of Millfield's most scandalous gossip. Children were my salvation in those early days, their uncomplicated needs and genuine affection forming a protective barrier against the adult world's cruelty. "Good morning, Miss Turner," they chorused, and for those precious hours, I could pretend my life hadn't imploded. The teacher's lounge was another matter entirely. Conversations halted mid-sentence when I entered. Sympathetic smiles barely concealed morbid fascination. Diane Winters, who taught 4th grade, attempted normalcy by asking about my summer curriculum plans, but her eyes kept darting to my bare ring finger. I heard they were planning it for months. I overheard the new music teacher whisper in the copy room. Her own sister. Can you imagine? I became an expert at appearing not to notice, at holding my head high while walking through the grocery store as conversations hushed, at smiling politely when well-meaning strangers offered unsolicited advice. "You're better off without him, honey. Some men just can't be trusted. She did you a favor. Imagine if you'd married him and discovered the truth later." Home offered little respite. My mother's monthly updates about Veronica were delivered with painful regularity, despite my protests that I didn't want to know. Veronica posted photos from the Hamptons. She mentioned one Sunday dinner, 6 months after the non-wedding. "They look happy." I pushed my pot roast around the plate. "Mom, please. I know it hurts, Emma, but she's still my daughter. I can't just pretend she doesn't exist." My father's hand covered mine. "Your mother's caught in the middle, sweetheart." I understood their impossible position, loving 2 daughters who could never again be in the same room. But it didn't make it easier to hear about Veronica's glamorous New York life with the man who was supposed to be my husband. "They've rented an apartment in Manhattan," my mother continued, unable to help herself. "Eric's found work at some investment firm. Veronica says." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to grade papers." It was Martha Sullivan who became my unexpected lifeline. Eric's mother appeared on my doorstep one rainy April evening, clutching a casserole dish, her eyes red-rimmed. "I keep making too much food," she said simply. "Old habits." We sat in my small living room, 2 abandoned women united by the same betrayal. Martha had aged a decade in a few months, the proud matriarch of Millfield's most respected family now diminished by her son's actions. "Robert barely speaks anymore," she confided, referring to her husband. "Just sits in his study staring at old photos. He won't even say Eric's name." Our Tuesday evening dinners became a ritual neither of us acknowledged but both desperately needed. We never discussed them at first, the unspoken rule. Instead we talked about her garden, my students, books we'd read, safe topics that allowed us to momentarily forget what connected us. Until the night she brought the photo album. "I found this while cleaning," Martha said, her voice catching. "Our family trip to Lake George. You were there. The summer after junior year. I'd gone with the Sullivans on their annual vacation. The photos showed teenagers in swimsuits laughing on a dock, Eric with his arm around me, Veronica sulking in the background. She always wanted what you had, Martha whispered, her finger tracing my sister's image. We should have seen it. Dating seemed impossible in Millfield, but loneliness drove me to try. Jason Crawford, who managed the local bank, took me to dinner 14 months after my wedding. That wasn't. He was kind, attractive, and completely wrong. I've always had a crush on you, he admitted over dessert. even in high school. What he didn't say, what hovered unspoken between us, was that I was now attainable, no longer Eric Patterson's girl. The evening ended with an awkward kiss and my promise to call him. I never did. Then came Daniel, a history teacher from the neighboring district who hadn't grown up in Millfield and didn't know my story. Our relationship lasted 3 months before he heard it from a colleague. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Because I wanted to be Emma, not poor Emma for once," I replied. He left, unable to handle the baggage I carried, or more truthfully, the town's fascination with it. After him came Michael, then Peter. Each attempt ending in the same uncomfortable realization that I wasn't just dating them. I was dating my history, my humiliation, the collective memory of my most painful moment. "You should move away," Jenna suggested during one of her visits from Chicago. "Start fresh somewhere no one knows you." But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting them win. Millfield was my home. I'd teach its children, tend my garden, and eventually the whispers would fade. I constructed a life of careful routine. Monday staff meetings, Tuesday dinners with Martha, Wednesday book club at the library, Thursday volunteering at the animal shelter, weekend grading and lesson planning. I planted tomatoes in summer, carved pumpkins in fall, built snowmen with neighborhood kids in winter, and planted flowers in spring. My days became predictable, controllable. Yet beneath this carefully orchestrated existence festered a bitterness I couldn't quite contain. It emerged in unexpected moments. When a student announced her mother was having a baby, and I realized I'd lost not just Eric but the future we'd planned. When wedding invitations arrived and I made excuses not to attend. When I drove past the house we'd planned to buy on Maple Street, now occupied by the Johnsons and their 3 children. "You need to forgive them," Pastor Wilson suggested during one of his well-meaning visits. "Not for their sake but for yours." But forgiveness felt impossible when the wounds remained so fresh. When my sister's occasional phone calls to our parents never included an apology. When Eric had simply vanished from my life without a backward glance. So I lived among the whispers, wearing my dignity like armor, finding purpose in my third grader's achievements and comfort in Martha's understanding. I convinced myself this half-life was enough, that the safety of my routines compensated for the emptiness inside. Until the day the letter arrived from Dannemora prison, and the carefully constructed fortress I'd built around myself began to crumble. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in April. Unremarkable except for the stamped return address. Dannemora Correctional Facility. The mail carrier handed it to me with the same casual indifference as the electric bill and supermarket flyers, unaware he was delivering an earthquake in paper form. I recognized Eric's handwriting immediately. The slightly slanted letters, the way he crossed his T's with a flourish. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 5 years of carefully constructed normalcy threatened to collapse with this unexpected intrusion from the past. I placed it on the kitchen table, unopened, and went about my evening routine, grading spelling tests, watering the African violet Martha had given me, making a simple dinner I barely tasted. The envelope sat there like an unexploded device, demanding attention I refused to give. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed in bed, imagining countless scenarios. Was it an apology? Request for money? Some final twist of the knife? By morning, the envelope remained unopened, my curiosity at war with self-preservation. "You got a letter from who?" Jenna exclaimed when I called her during my lunch break, seeking guidance. "I haven't opened it yet," I admitted, huddled in the corner of the teacher's lounge. "Throw it away," she said firmly. "Nothing good can come from reopening that wound." Perhaps she was right. Yet I couldn't bring myself to dispose of it. For 2 more days the envelope accompanied me, from table to counter to bedside table, its presence a constant reminder of the past I couldn't quite escape. On the 3rd evening, after a glass of wine and Martha's cancelled dinner plans, I finally slid my finger under the flap. "Dear Emma, I never expected to write this letter, and you have every right to throw it away unread. But circumstances have forced my hand. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe less. I know I don't deserve your time or forgiveness. What Veronica and I did was unforgivable. But before I die, I need to see you one last time. I made a terrible mistake. Please meet me one last time, before it's too late. There are things you need to know. Truths I should have told you years ago. The visiting hours are listed on the back of this page if you decide to come. I understand if you don't. Eric. I read it twice, then a third time, my emotions cycling between shock, anger, and a vindictive satisfaction I immediately felt ashamed of. Cancer. Prison. Both sentences he never expected when he drove away from Millfield with my sister. I flipped the page, finding the printed visiting schedule and another handwritten note. I'm at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora. Inmate #A7842-19. Convicted of securities fraud and wire fraud. 5-year sentence. 2 years served. The internet filled in the blanks. A search for Eric Patterson securities fraud yielded a Wall Street Journal article from 3 years ago. Rising star broker sentenced in $4.2 million investment scheme. There was a mugshot I barely recognized, Eric's confident smile replaced by hollow eyes and gaunt cheeks. According to the article, he'd created an elaborate Ponzi scheme targeting wealthy investors, promising extraordinary returns that initially materialized through new investors' money before the inevitable collapse. No mention of Veronica. Just Eric, described as a calculating predator who betrayed the trust of clients who believed in him. The school librarian found me hunched over the computer after hours, tears streaming down my face. Emma, are you all right? I closed the browser quickly. Just reading a sad story. That night I sat on my porch swing, letter in hand, completely adrift. Part of me, the still wounded part, felt a dark satisfaction. The man who had humiliated me was suffering, imprisoned, dying. Wasn't that the justice I'd secretly craved during those endless nights after the non-wedding? Yet another voice whispered that this changed nothing. Whatever truths Eric wanted to share couldn't undo the devastation he and Veronica had caused. Why reopen healed wounds? Why give him the closure he sought when he denied me mine? I did what I always did when truly conflicted. I called Martha. He's dying, I said when she answered, my voice cracking. A sharp intake of breath. Who's dying, Emma? Eric. The name felt foreign on my tongue after years of avoiding it. He wrote me from prison. Pancreatic cancer. Silence stretched between us, heavy with shared pain. Have you told Robert? Finally asked. Not yet. Her voice sounded distant. What does he want from you? To see me. He says there are things I need to know. Martha sighed, the sound of a woman who had exhausted her capacity for grief. Will you go? I don't know. But even as I said it, I recognized the lie. Some gravitational pull was already drawing me toward Dannemora, toward answers I both craved and feared. Would you? If you were me. Emma, I've imagined conversations with my son every day for 5 years. What I'd say. What he'd say. The questions I'd ask. Pause. But imagination is safe. Reality might break us all over again. After we hung up, I sat watching fireflies emerge in my small backyard, their brief flashes of light punctuating the darkness. 5 years ago, my future had seemed as clearly mapped as the streets of Millfield. Now I stood at another crossroads, unsure which path led to healing and which to fresh pain. By morning my decision was made. I requested a week's personal leave from Principal Davis, packed a small suitcase, and plotted the route to Dannemora on my GPS. A 6-hour drive north to the edge of the Adirondacks. Martha appeared as I was loading my car, holding a thermos of coffee and a tin of homemade cookies. Road provisions, she said simply. Then pressing something into my palm, and this. A small, smooth stone with the word courage etched into its surface. Whatever you discover, whatever he tells you, remember you've survived the worst already. The drive north gave me too much time to think, to rehearse the confrontation awaiting me. Would I be cold and distant? Would I scream the questions that had haunted me for years? Would I sit in silence, forcing him to fill the void he'd created? I practiced possible scenarios aloud as miles of highway unspooled before me. How could you do this to me? Was any of it real, or was I just convenient until something better came along? Did you laugh about it afterward? Did you both find it amusing, poor naive Emma waiting at the altar? By the time I checked into a Spartan motel 20 minutes from the prison, my emotions had cycled through rage, grief, curiosity, and exhaustion. Tomorrow I would face the man who had shattered my world. Tomorrow I would finally get answers. What I couldn't know as I lay sleepless in that unfamiliar bed was that Eric's revelations would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my sister, my ex-fiancé, and the betrayal that had defined the last 5 years of my life. Clinton Correctional Facility loomed against the morning sky, its imposing stone walls and guard towers a stark contrast to the peaceful Adirondack landscape surrounding it. I sat in my car, gripping Martha's Courage stone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The clock on my dashboard read 9:47 a.m. Visiting hours began at 10 o'clock. After a sleepless night rehearsing what I would say, the moment of confrontation had arrived. I applied lipstick with trembling hands, a small armor of normalcy against what awaited inside. The processing area smelled of disinfectant and processed air. I surrendered my belongings, passed through metal detectors, endured the suspicious scrutiny of corrections officers. My visitor's badge felt like a brand against my blouse. "First time?" asked an older woman in line ahead of me, her weathered face kind. I nodded, unable to explain my presence to a stranger. "It gets easier," she offered, though nothing about this felt like something I should get used to. The visiting room was neither as grim nor as chaotic as I'd imagined from TV shows. Tables bolted to the floor. Vending machines humming against one wall. Families clustered together. Mothers bouncing babies on their laps. Children showing drawings to men in identical green uniforms. Couples holding hands across tables under the watchful eyes of guards. I almost didn't recognize him. The Eric Patterson who had vanished from Millfield bore little resemblance to the hollow-cheeked man who approached my table. Prison had stripped away his golden boy confidence along with 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. His once athletic frame appeared almost fragile beneath the standard-issue uniform. Cancer had done the rest. His complexion held the sallow undertone of serious illness, and his eyes, those blue eyes that had once made my heart race, were sunken and rimmed with shadows. "Emma." My name emerged like a prayer from lips I once knew better than my own. "You came." I hadn't planned to stand, but my body moved automatically. For one disorienting moment I thought he might try to embrace me. Instead, he extended his hand formally, as if we were strangers meeting at a business function. I didn't take it. We sat across from each other, the cheap laminate table a canyon between our separate worlds. Up close I could see the yellow tinge to his skin, jaundice, a sign the cancer had reached his liver. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I." The words came out colder than intended. A sad smile flickered across his face. "I deserve that. I deserve all your anger." "What I deserve is an explanation," I countered. 5 years is a long time to wait. Eric's eyes dropped to his hands, thinner with bitten nails, a far cry from the manicured fingers that had once slid a diamond ring onto mine. "I wouldn't have reached out if..." He swallowed hard. "If circumstances hadn't forced my hand." "You mean dying?" He flinched at my bluntness but nodded. 3 months, maybe less. Something about facing the end makes you take inventory of your mistakes. And I was what, your biggest regret? My voice cracked despite my determination to remain composed. "One of many." He looked up, meeting my gaze. "But not for the reasons you think." For the next hour, Eric unraveled a story so twisted I could barely process it. Their escape to New York, the perfect new life I'd imagined them building on the ruins of mine, had quickly soured. "Veronica changed once we got to the city," he explained. "It was like watching someone shed their skin. The woman I thought I loved disappeared, replaced by someone obsessed with status, money, connections." "So you turned to fraud?" I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. "Not at first." He shook his head. "I got a legitimate job at Meridian Investments. Worked 16-hour days trying to build something that would justify." He gestured vaguely, unable to put into words the devastation they'd left behind. "Justify destroying me?" I supplied. Pain flashed across his face. "Nothing could justify that." Veronica, meanwhile, had grown increasingly dissatisfied. The apartment wasn't luxurious enough. His salary, though substantial for a newcomer, couldn't support the lifestyle she craved. The glamorous social media posts my mother had described, designer clothes, exclusive restaurants, Hamptons weekends, were financed by maxed-out credit cards and mounting debt. She kept saying we deserved more. That we hadn't taken this risk just to live like everyone else. The first questionable investment opportunity came 6 months after they arrived in New York. A small manipulation of client funds, quickly replaced before anyone noticed. Then another. Each time the stakes higher, the schemes more elaborate. It was Veronica who suggested creating the investment fund. Eric admitted, his voice hollow. She had an incredible mind for it, identifying wealthy targets, crafting the perfect pitch. I was just the front man, the trusted face with the finance background. I felt physically ill. You're saying my sister masterminded a multi-million-dollar fraud? She did more than that. His eyes held a haunted look. She planned her exit strategy from the beginning. Not just from Millfield or from you, from me. 18 months ago, as federal investigators began closing in, Veronica had disappeared. One morning Eric woke to an empty bed, emptied accounts and altered documents throughout their home office that implicated him as the sole architect of the fraud. She took everything, the cash, the offshore accounts, even jewelry she could pawn. Left me with nothing but fabricated evidence perfectly organized for the FBI to find. I wanted to disbelieve him, to label this another manipulation. Yet something in his defeated posture, in the utter lack of self-preservation in his confession, rang true. Why would she do this? I whispered. Eric reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, sliding it across the table. A guard stepped forward, but Eric raised his hands. Just a letter. She's allowed to see it. The paper was worn thin from repeated folding and unfolding. I recognized Veronica's handwriting immediately. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Did you really think this was about us? You were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall. Don't try to find me. You won't succeed. The breath left my lungs in a rush. 5 simple sentences that confirmed every insecurity I'd ever felt about my beautiful, ambitious, dangerous sister. I was a means to an end for her, Eric said quietly. And so were you. I stared at him across the table, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the villain of my story, but as another victim of Veronica's calculated games. We were both pawns, I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. Eric nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else. A question he seemed afraid to ask. A guard announced visiting hours were ending. Inmates began saying their goodbyes, hugging children and kissing partners. Eric and I sat motionless, connected by a shared betrayal neither of us had fully understood until this moment. I have so many questions, I finally managed. Come back tomorrow, he said, a plea in his voice. There's more you need to know. As I drove back to my motel, my sister's note burned in my pocket like a live coal. The woman who had shared my childhood bedroom, who had braided my hair for prom, who had stood beside me as I chose my wedding dress, had been plotting against us both all along. The question that haunted me wasn't why Eric had left me at the altar anymore. It was why Veronica had hated me enough to orchestrate our mutual destruction. I returned to Millfield with Eric's medical power of attorney in my purse and a mission burning in my mind. The remainder of the school year passed in a blur. Teaching, grading final projects, attending the 5th grade graduation. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the new intensity that had replaced 5 years of careful numbness. You seem different, Principal Davis remarked during our end-of-year meeting. More present. I smiled without explanation. How could I tell her that rage had awakened something in me? Not the impotent anger I'd nursed after being left at the altar, but a focused fury directed at the true architect of my pain. The day after school ended, I converted my dining room into an investigation headquarters. Maps, timelines, and notes covered the walls. I created a systematic approach, beginning with what Eric had shared during our subsequent prison visits. After she disappeared, I hired a private investigator, he told me, his voice weaker during our final meeting. Depleted my last savings before the arrest. He traced her to Charleston initially, but the trail went cold. That was my starting point. I contacted the investigator, a retired NYPD detective named Hargrove, who was initially reluctant to speak with me. Client confidentiality, he explained over the phone. The client is dying, I countered. And I'm his medical proxy now. He's authorized me to access everything. Hargrove's files proved invaluable: bank transactions, travel records, a single blurry photograph of a woman who resembled Veronica entering a South Carolina bank. Most crucially, he traced a wire transfer to a Miami account under the name Vivian Taylor. Miami, Martha said when I showed her my progress. We'd become unexpected partners in this quest, her organizational skills complementing my determination. It makes sense. International banking connections, quick escape routes to Caribbean countries with no extradition. I booked a flight to Miami for the first week of July, using most of my summer savings. The city's oppressive heat hit me like a wall as I exited the airport, but my focus never wavered. I'd rented a small efficiency apartment in South Beach as my base of operations, chosen for its proximity to the financial district where Vivian Taylor had opened her account. 3 days of careful surveillance outside the bank yielded nothing. On the fourth morning I nearly missed her. The woman who emerged from a sleek silver Mercedes wore oversized sunglasses, her once dark hair now platinum blonde and cut in a sophisticated bob. But I recognized the distinctive way she tilted her head when checking her phone, a mannerism so familiar it sent a jolt through me. Veronica, my sister, living her glamorous new life while Eric wasted away in prison. I followed her to an upscale coffee shop, watching through the window as she chatted animatedly with a well-dressed older man. They reviewed documents together, laughing occasionally, the picture of successful business partners. I snapped photos with my phone, hands trembling with adrenaline. Back in my rental, I researched the man, Harold Wexler, prominent Miami real estate developer. His company website featured Vivian Taylor as Director of International Investments. My sister's reinvention was complete. My next lead came from an unexpected source. Eric had mentioned his former business partner, James Corrigan, who had narrowly avoided indictment when the fraud was discovered. James knew something was wrong, Eric had explained. He tried to warn me about Veronica, but I was too blind to see it. Corrigan proved difficult to locate. After the scandal, he'd retreated from finance, apparently working now as a sailing instructor in Connecticut. I drove 6 hours to find him, rehearsing my approach. The man adjusting rigging on a small sailboat looked nothing like the polished investment banker from news photos. Sun-weathered and casually dressed, Corrigan spotted me hovering on the dock and froze. "You look just like her," he said without preamble. "I'm nothing like her," I replied. Over beer at a dockside restaurant, Corrigan filled crucial gaps in my understanding. "Veronica approached me first, before Eric came to an industry event, introduced herself, asked pointed questions about our client structure." "When was this?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "About 8 months before your wedding." The timeline hit me like a physical blow. Veronica had been plotting this while helping me choose wedding invitations, while standing beside me at dress fittings. "She wanted inside information about our firm," Corrigan continued. "When I didn't bite, she targeted Eric. I warned him she seemed calculating, but..." He shrugged. He said I was jealous. Maybe I was. But I also saw something predatory in her that he couldn't. The pieces shifted in my mind, forming a clearer picture. But I needed more. I returned to Millfield, to my parents' house where Veronica and I had grown up. While they vacationed in Maine, I searched our childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room. Nothing unusual until I examined the antique jewelry box my grandmother had left Veronica, something she hadn't taken in her calculated escape. Hidden in a false bottom lay a small key with a numbered tag, a storage unit key. The facility was on the outskirts of town. One of those anonymous places where people store the remnants of failed marriages or deceased relatives' belongings. Unit 227 contained a single plastic bin. Inside, I found the evidence of my sister's long-term betrayal, journals documenting her resentments, photographs of me with tracked movements, detailed notes about Eric dating back to high school. Most disturbing were files about other relationships she'd sabotaged, an anonymous email that had driven away my college boyfriend, coincidental meetings with my first teaching colleague who'd expressed interest in me. Veronica had systematically eliminated potential happiness from my life long before she took Eric. I was still processing this discovery when the first threat arrived. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." 2 days later, my classroom at Pinewood was vandalized. Nothing was stolen, but my desk was rifled through, my files disturbed. The police called it random, but Martha and I knew better. "She's watching you," Martha said, helping me clean up the mess. "Which means you're getting close to something that threatens her." The final threat came as a brick through my living room window with a note attached. "Last warning." That's when I made the call to the FBI's white-collar crime division, speaking to Special Agent Diaz, who had built the case against Eric. "I know who really orchestrated the Patterson investment fraud," I said. And I have proof she's operating under a new identity in Miami. 2 weeks later, I sat in a Miami hotel room while federal agents attached a wire to my body. Agent Diaz reviewed the plan one final time. Meet Veronica at the upscale restaurant where I'd made reservations under my name, knowing her curiosity would override her caution. Wear the watch with the recording device. Get her to talk about the past. Be careful, Diaz warned. Your sister has proven she's ruthless when cornered. I nodded, examining my reflection. 5 years of pain had hardened me in ways Veronica wouldn't expect. The timid, trusting sister she'd betrayed no longer existed. Don't worry, I replied, adjusting my earrings, the ones Eric had given me for our last Christmas together. I know exactly who I'm dealing with now. As I walked into the restaurant, spotting Veronica already seated at a corner table, her new blonde hair gleaming under recessed lighting, I felt strangely calm. The woman who had systematically destroyed my life sat sipping champagne, unaware that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. Justice had taken 5 years, but it had finally found its way to my sister's door. Emma. My name sounded foreign in Veronica's mouth as I slid into the chair across from her. What an unexpected surprise. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which darted around the restaurant calculating escape routes. The platinum blonde hair and designer dress couldn't mask the sister I'd grown up with. The same calculating glint remained behind her carefully crafted facade. Hello, Vivian, I replied, emphasizing her false name. Or do you prefer Veronica when it's just family? A flicker of unease crossed her features before she recovered, raising her champagne flute in a mock toast. I wondered how long it would take you to find me. I'm impressed it only took 5 years. Would have been sooner if I'd known you were the mastermind all along. Her laugh was practiced, theatrical. Mastermind? Always so dramatic, Emma. I simply saw an opportunity for a better life and took it. By destroying mine? By setting up your boyfriend to take the fall for your crimes. Veronica's posture shifted subtly, her shoulders tightening. Eric made his own choices. I placed Veronica's letter to Eric on the table between us, watching her face as recognition dawned. Asterisk, you were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall. Asterisk, I quoted. Those were your words, weren't they? Right before you disappeared with millions and left him to face prison alone. The first crack in her composure, a slight tremor in the hand reaching for her water glass. Where did you get that? From Eric. He's dying of pancreatic cancer in Dannemora prison while you're reinventing yourself as Vivian Taylor, Director of International Investments. I leaned forward. I also found your storage unit in Millfield. The journals. The evidence of how methodically you sabotaged every relationship I ever had. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You always had everything handed to you. The pretty one. The sweet one. Everyone's favorite Turner daughter. Is that how you justified it? Destroying my life because you were jealous. I justified nothing, she snapped, the polished Miami socialite momentarily replaced by the bitter sister I'd never truly known. I took what I deserved. And Harold Wexler? Does he know his brilliant investment director is actually a fugitive who orchestrated a multi-million-dollar fraud? That the SEC and FBI are very interested in her current activities. The color drained from Veronica's face. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. What do you want? Money? Is that why you're here? Justice, I replied simply, touching my watch to ensure the recording device was capturing everything. For Eric. For me. For everyone you've hurt. Her smug mask crumbled completely. You're wearing a wire. I didn't answer, but my expression must have confirmed her suspicion. She leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you've won? Poor, pathetic Emma, still trying to prove she matters. She laughed bitterly. Do you know how easy it was to take Eric from you? One conversation. That's all it took for him to forget 5 years with you. One promise of excitement beyond your suffocating small-town life. I maintained eye contact, refusing to show how her words still had power to wound. Tell me about the investment fraud, Veronica. About the doctored documents you left for the FBI. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse. This conversation is over. It is, I agreed calmly. Because federal agents are at every exit. Your new life is over, Veronica. As if on cue, Agent Diaz approached our table, badge displayed. Veronica Turner? You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The look my sister gave me as they led her away wasn't rage or even hatred. It was something closer to respect. A final acknowledgement that she had underestimated me completely. 2 weeks later, I sat beside Eric's hospital bed in the prison infirmary. The cancer had accelerated, leaving him jaundiced and frail, his breathing labored. I held his hand, telling him everything: Veronica's arrest, the evidence recovered, the additional charges being filed. She never loved me, did she? He asked, his voice barely audible. I don't think she knows how to love, I answered honestly. He nodded, eyes closing briefly. I tried to back out, the morning of the wedding. Told her I couldn't go through with it, that I needed to tell you the truth. What happened? She threatened to tell everyone about a mistake I'd made at work. A client's account I'd briefly mishandled. Said she'd make sure I lost my license, my reputation. His grip tightened slightly on mine. I was a coward, Emma. Afraid of scandal, of failure. I'm so sorry. We were both manipulated, I said, surprised to find I meant it. In his final days, we found an unexpected peace. Not reconciliation exactly, but a shared understanding of how thoroughly we'd both been deceived. When he died 3 weeks later, I was there holding his hand as he slipped away. Martha and I attended his small funeral together, standing apart from the few others who came. Back in Millfield, we planted a maple tree in her backyard in his memory. Not for the man who had abandoned me, but for the fellow victim who had helped me find the truth. 8 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom for Veronica's sentencing. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just for the original fraud but for her subsequent crimes under her false identity. She sat expressionless at the defense table, not once looking in my direction. When called to deliver my victim impact statement, I approached the podium with steady steps. The courtroom fell silent as I faced the judge, my prepared statement forgotten as I spoke from the heart. My sister stole more than money. She methodically destroyed my trust, my future, my capacity to believe in others. For 5 years I lived half a life defined by her betrayal. But standing here today I reclaim my story. Veronica's actions reflect on her character, not my worth. In seeking justice I found myself again. The 15-year sentence provided no satisfaction, only closure. What truly healed me was the letter delivered by Martha 3 weeks after Eric's death. His final communication, written in shaky handwriting during his last days. Emma, by the time you read this I'll be gone. There's one last truth I never told you. The morning of our wedding I called your cell phone repeatedly. I wanted to confess everything, to beg your forgiveness. Veronica had taken your phone while helping you dress. She intercepted every call, told me you were having doubts too. Another manipulation in her grand design. I know it changes nothing, but I loved you, Emma. Truly. In my weakness I lost the one genuine thing in my life. Find happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I've known. Eric. 1 year after Veronica's sentencing, I stood in my empty Millfield home, boxes packed for my move to Boston. I'd accepted a position at Brighton Academy, a prestigious private school that had recruited me after learning about my role in uncovering the fraud case that had made national headlines. Martha arrived to say goodbye, bringing a small potted plant for my new apartment. Ready for your fresh start? She asked, embracing me. More than ready, I replied. As I drove away from Millfield, past the church where I'd once waited in vain for a groom who never came, I felt no bitterness. The small-town teacher defined by scandal and betrayal was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced her deepest pain and emerged stronger. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't in Veronica's imprisonment or in exposing her crimes. It was in reclaiming my future, one brave choice at a time. In refusing to let her actions dictate the rest of my story. Some ties, even blood ties, are meant to be broken. And sometimes from those broken pieces, we build something stronger than before. On my prom night, my boyfriend abandoned me for my best friend, leaving me stranded in the rain. They mocked me, thinking I'd never be anything without them. Years later, when they showed up to my exclusive gala, they realized too late who I had become. The air was thick with anticipation. Prom night. The grand event that every high school student dreamt of. The night where fairy tales seemed possible, where the stars aligned just right, and the world whispered promises of forever. For me, Lena Carter, it was supposed to be magical. I had the perfect dress, a soft, flowing creation of satin and lace in midnight blue, a color Jason once told me made my eyes look enchanting. My hair was styled in elegant waves, my makeup subtle yet alluring. This night I thought would be the kind of memory I'd hold close forever. Jason, my boyfriend of 2 years, had promised we'd dance until our feet ached. He had whispered those words with the kind of devotion that made me believe in happily ever afters. And then there was Emily, my best friend since childhood, the sister I never had. She had helped me pick out my dress, assured me I'd be the most stunning girl in the room. Looking back, I should have noticed the lingering glances between her and Jason, the way she avoided my eyes whenever I gushed about how lucky I was to have him. But love makes fools of us all, and I had been the biggest fool of them all. Before we dive into this gripping tale of power, redemption, and ultimate victory, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If you enjoy stories of transformation, resilience, and getting the last word in style, make sure to subscribe. It's free and helps us bring more compelling narratives to life. Now let's begin. The ballroom was dazzling, golden chandeliers casting shimmering reflections across the polished floor. The music pulsed through my veins, the scent of roses and expensive perfume filling the air. Laughter echoed from every corner as students basked in the joy of youth and fleeting freedom. I was laughing too, unaware that my world was about to shatter. Jason had been acting strange all night, distracted, his grip on my hand loose. I chalked it up to nerves, assuming he had some grand romantic surprise planned. Then, just as the DJ called out the final dance of the night, Jason stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. My heart pounded. Was this it? A grand declaration of love? My breath hitched as he smiled, until he turned his gaze not to me but to Emily. "Lena," he began, and for a fleeting second, I believed I was about to hear something beautiful. "I think we need to be honest here. You're a great girl, but you're just not the one for me." Silence swallowed the room. My pulse roared in my ears. I felt my knees weaken, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. Jason exhaled dramatically, as if this was a scene he had rehearsed in his head 100 times. "Emily and we've been seeing each other for a while now." A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. I turned to Emily, searching for denial, for regret. But all I found was a smug, victorious smirk. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But it just happened. Just happened." The words repeated in my head over and over until they became meaningless noise. My hands trembled. I could feel 1,000 eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to break. Jason chuckled, his arm now draped around Emily's waist. "Come on, Lena. Did you really think you could keep up with us? We're moving on to bigger things. You're just you." Laughter erupted from the crowd, not from everyone, but enough to make my face burn with humiliation. My vision blurred with unshed tears, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. I turned on my heel and ran, the sound of their laughter chasing me as I pushed through the doors and into the storm outside. Rain pelted against my skin, soaking through my dress, my hair, my very bones. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold together the fragments of my shattered heart. I had loved him. I had trusted her. And in return they had turned me into nothing more than a joke. I don't know how long I stood there in the rain, the world around me blurred and distorted by heartbreak and betrayal. Cars honked in the distance, the streetlights flickering above me like indifferent stars. I should have gone home, should have sought comfort in my family, but the idea of walking into my house and explaining what had happened felt like another layer of agony I wasn't ready to face. Then, as if the universe wasn't finished breaking me, I heard them, Jason and Emily, emerging from the venue, their laughter ringing through the night. "You should have seen her face," Jason snickered. "Pathetic," Emily added, not even bothering to lower her voice. A car door slammed. I watched through the curtain of rain as Jason revved his engine, tires screeching against the wet pavement as they drove away, leaving me there, drenched, abandoned, humiliated. For the first time in my life I felt truly, utterly alone. But as the cold seeped into my skin, another feeling began to stir beneath the heartbreak. It was faint, buried beneath layers of pain and betrayal, but it was there. A spark. A whisper of something dark and unrelenting. They thought I would crumble. They thought I was weak. They thought I was nothing. That night, as I stood in the rain, I made a silent vow. I would become something greater than they could ever imagine. I would rise not despite them but because of them. They had taken everything from me. But one day I would take everything from them. The rain poured relentlessly as I stood motionless on the empty sidewalk, my soaked dress clinging to my trembling frame. Jason and Emily's laughter had long faded into the distance, yet the sound of their cruelty echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. The weight of betrayal pressed down on my chest, suffocating, unrelenting. I didn't know how long I stayed there, my fingers digging into my arms as if holding myself together could prevent the world from completely unraveling. Cars passed, their headlights illuminating my shattered reflection in puddles along the street. The girl staring back was unfamiliar, broken, discarded, humiliated. I had two choices. I could go home, crawl into bed and let the pain consume me. Or I could let this night be the turning point, the moment I decided that I would never be weak again. I turned on my heel, my soaked heels clicking against the pavement as I walked away from the school, away from the place that had watched me crumble. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I would never be the same girl who had walked into that ballroom full of hope and trust. That version of me had vanished in the storm. The following weeks were unbearable. At school, whispers followed me down every hallway. People glanced at me with a mix of amusement and pity, their hushed voices retelling the same cruel story. How Jason had chosen Emily over me, how I had stood there frozen as my world fell apart. Emily, ever the actress, played the role of the reluctant victor. She put on a show of guilt, telling anyone who would listen that she'd never wanted to hurt me, that it just happened. Jason, on the other hand, reveled in his new position, wearing his betrayal like a badge of honor. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the way people looked at me, as if I were fragile, incapable, insignificant. That was the moment I realized something that changed everything. It wasn't just Jason and Emily who thought I was beneath them. It was everyone. That realization fueled a fire inside me, burning away the sorrow and replacing it with something far more powerful: determination. I cut ties with everyone. The so-called friends who had laughed behind my back. The classmates who gossiped about my downfall. Even the teachers who had once praised my potential now looked at me with quiet sympathy. I erased them all from my life. I stopped attending school events, ignored invitations and deleted my social media accounts. If the world wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would let them, because when I returned, I wouldn't just exist. I would dominate. Every moment of pain became fuel. I studied harder than ever, spending sleepless nights buried in books, determined to secure a future so grand that no one would ever doubt me again. I took every advanced course I could, pushing myself past exhaustion, past limits I never knew existed. But it wasn't just academics. I transformed myself entirely. I took control of my fitness, training relentlessly, strengthening my body as much as my mind. I changed the way I spoke, the way I carried myself. I stopped seeking approval, stopped apologizing for taking up space. By the time graduation arrived, I was a different person. I walked across that stage, head high, expression unreadable. Jason and Emily were still together, still believing they had won. But I had long since realized that their so-called victory was temporary. They had taken my heart and crushed it beneath their heels. But I was building something far greater than anything they could ever dream of. After graduation, I vanished. I didn't just leave town, I erased my past entirely. No social media, no messages, no trace. I stepped into a new world, a new identity. College became my battleground. I entered a world where no one knew my past, where I could craft my narrative from scratch. And I did. I excelled in everything I touched, networking with the right people, seizing opportunities, and building a reputation that spoke of power, intelligence, and ambition. Over the years, I climbed higher and higher. I built an empire, not just wealth but influence. My name, Lena Beaumont, became synonymous with success. People sought my approval, my presence. My decisions shaped industries, my words carried weight. And through it all, I never forgot that night. The rain. The laughter. The betrayal. I had turned my pain into my greatest weapon. And now it was time to use it. Because while I had risen to heights they could never imagine, Jason and Emily had remained exactly where I had left them, believing they had won. But they had no idea what was coming. I had spent years preparing for this moment, carefully ensuring that when I made my move, it would be absolute. It wasn't about revenge in the way most people understood it. I didn't want to ruin them in a fit of anger. I wanted something far greater. I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. I wanted them to realize too late that they had never truly won. And I had the perfect plan to make that happen. It started with an invitation. A gilded envelope, embossed with the insignia of my exclusive luxury brand. A personal invite to an event so grand, so prestigious, that only the most elite members of society would have the privilege of attending. Jason and Emily had spent years chasing success, trying to climb social ladders that always seemed just out of reach. They had settled into a life of mediocrity, still clinging to the belief that they were meant for something more. So when that invitation arrived, they saw it as their chance. They had no idea that it was a trap. A beautifully designed, exquisitely crafted trap. As they held that invitation in their hands, as they excitedly planned their entrance, as they imagined the doors that would open for them, they had no idea that they were walking straight into the final act of my story. The story I had been writing since the night they left me standing in the rain. And soon they would finally understand. Revenge isn't about rage. It isn't about chaos. It's about control. And I had spent years mastering it. Jason and Emily had no idea what awaited them. That invitation in their hands wasn't a golden opportunity. It was a meticulously planned doorway to their downfall. Years of patience, of quiet calculation had led to this moment. I had built my empire with ruthless precision, leaving no room for mistakes. Every move had been strategic, every decision purposeful. Now the final act was in motion and they were stepping into it completely unaware. The gala would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. Hosted in one of the most luxurious venues in the city, a glass-walled masterpiece overlooking the skyline. It was designed for the elite, the kind of people Jason and Emily had always aspired to be. It was a symbol of wealth, power, and influence, a world they had spent years trying to infiltrate without success. And now, as they held that invitation, they believed their time had come. I watched from a distance as Jason struggled to contain his excitement. His once effortless charm had dulled with time, and the weight of financial struggles was evident in the way his smile strained at the corners. Emily, still clinging to her past beauty, adjusted her reflection in a compact mirror, ensuring she looked the part. They thought they were on the verge of something grand. They thought they had been chosen. As the night of the gala approached, my team worked tirelessly to perfect every detail. The guest list had been carefully curated, ensuring that every individual in attendance was someone of true significance. Celebrities, industry moguls, political figures, the kind of people who dictated the course of the world with a mere word. Jason and Emily, oblivious to the truth, had no idea that they were stepping into a gathering where they would be the lowest in status, surrounded by those who would see them for what they truly were, pretenders. The night arrived and the venue gleamed like a beacon of power. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across the grand hall, while a live orchestra played a melody that resonated with sophistication. Guests arrived in sleek, expensive vehicles, their presence alone commanding attention. It was the kind of event that most people only read about, a gathering reserved for those who truly mattered. Jason and Emily arrived late, a deliberate choice on their part. They wanted to make an entrance to be noticed. But as they stepped onto the marble floors, the grandeur of the event consumed them. Their expressions flickered between awe and intimidation. They had expected luxury, but they hadn't anticipated the overwhelming presence of the world's most powerful figures. I watched them from a distance, unseen, just as I had planned. I had become a master of control, of orchestrating situations without ever being directly involved. I observed the way Jason nervously adjusted his tie, the way Emily clutched his arm just a little too tightly. They were out of their depth and it was starting to sink in. As they moved through the crowd, they tried to blend in, forcing confident smiles and initiating conversations with anyone who would listen. But they quickly realized the stark reality of their situation. No one knew who they were. No one cared. Every attempt at conversation was met with polite dismissal. Every introduction brushed aside with effortless disinterest. They were insignificant background noise in a world that had no space for them. Then came the moment they had been waiting for, the host's arrival. The murmurs began as I made my entrance, escorted by individuals whose influence reached beyond borders. The shift in energy was palpable. Eyes turned toward me, conversations paused, and the weight of my presence settled over the room like a carefully placed hand on a chessboard. Jason and Emily, caught in the middle of it all, froze. Recognition dawned on their faces, slow and agonizing. Jason's expression tightened, his posture stiffening as realization set in. Emily, once so composed, visibly paled, her grip on his arm turning rigid. I let them stare, let them absorb the truth they had spent years unaware of. The Lena they had abandoned on that rainy night was gone. In her place stood someone untouchable, someone they could never reach. Jason was the first to recover, forcing a strange smile as he approached. Lena. He hesitated as if saying my name felt foreign. I had no idea. I met his gaze with an unreadable expression, allowing the silence to stretch between us. The power of silence is often underestimated, but in moments like these, it speaks louder than any words could. Emily, desperate to regain control, forced a laugh. We were just talking about how incredible this event is. You must be so. I tilted my head slightly, my gaze sharp. You shouldn't be here. My voice was calm, measured, yet it sliced through the air with quiet finality. Jason faltered. But, we were invited. A small, knowing smile played at my lips. Were you? The weight of the question settled heavily between us. Doubt flickered in their eyes. Had they truly been invited? Had they misread the situation? Emily's hand clenched into a fist at her side, her confidence crumbling. Lena, we. I turned away before she could finish, shifting my attention to the people who actually mattered. With a simple nod, security subtly moved in, ensuring that Jason and Emily found themselves gently but firmly guided toward the exit. They didn't resist. They couldn't. As they disappeared through the grand doors, I allowed myself a quiet breath of satisfaction. But this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. Jason and Emily had spent years believing they had won, believing they had walked away victorious. But as they stood outside the venue, shunned and humiliated, they finally understood the truth. They hadn't won. They had simply delayed their realization of what true power looked like. And now they would live with that knowledge, knowing that the girl they had once betrayed had risen beyond their reach. I had built an empire. I had reshaped my world. And now, as I stood in the midst of power and influence, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was untouchable. Jason and Emily stood outside the grand venue, their once bright expressions drained of color. The realization had settled in like a slow-moving storm. This was never an opportunity. It had always been a carefully laid trap. The whispers around them were deafening, not in volume but in weight. The security guards, though polite, had been firm in their dismissal, ensuring that the doors of high society would remain permanently shut in their faces. Emily adjusted the hem of her overpriced dress, her hands trembling as she glanced around, desperate to salvage her dignity. Jason, ever the actor, forced a laugh, trying to pretend as if this was some kind of misunderstanding. It's probably just a mistake, he muttered, mostly to himself. Lena wouldn't do this to us. But the sinking feeling in his gut told him otherwise. He had recognized that look in my eyes inside the ballroom, the same look he had once worn when he humiliated me all those years ago. The tables had turned and there was no undoing what had just happened. Emily exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. Let's just go. This isn't worth it. But it was worth it. At least to me. As they stepped away from the venue, a photographer discreetly snapped pictures from the shadows. Not a paparazzo. No, that would be too easy. This was someone I had hired specifically for this moment, someone who would ensure their public embarrassment spread exactly as planned. The next morning, tabloids ran the headline. Wannabe socialites denied entry to elite gala. Who are they really? Their photos were plastered across social media. The comments were ruthless. People speculated on their identities, mocking their desperation to belong. The narrative had shifted. Jason and Emily, once so confident in their ability to navigate social circles, were now the subjects of ridicule. And the best part? They didn't even know it was orchestrated. Jason's phone buzzed endlessly that day, former acquaintances distancing themselves, colleagues avoiding him. Emily, who had prided herself on her beauty and status, found herself blocked from the very influencers she had spent years trying to impress. I watched it unfold from a distance, sipping my morning coffee as I read through the comments. The fall was just beginning. A few days later, an envelope arrived at their doorstep. No return address, no signature. Just a thick ivory invitation card with gold foil lettering. Lena Beaumont requests your presence for a private dinner. A chance to understand. Jason hesitated as he read it, his fingers tightening around the cardstock. It's a setup, he muttered. It has to be. Emily, who had been spiraling since the gala, snatched the invitation from his hands. Do we have a choice? She asked, her voice brittle. We're already being laughed at. If there's a way to fix this, we take it. And just like that, they walked willingly into the second part of the trap. The restaurant I had chosen was one of the most exclusive in the city. The kind of place that required months of reservations, where privacy was ensured for only the most important guests. When Jason and Emily arrived, they were led to a secluded, candlelit booth in the back. I was already there waiting. Dressed in an elegant, sharp ensemble, I exuded the kind of effortless confidence they had never believed I was capable of. As they slid into the booth across from me, the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Jason cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Lena, you look different. I took a slow sip of my wine before setting the glass down deliberately. It's been years after all. Emily, trying to reclaim whatever power she still had, leaned forward. Why are we here? I let the silence stretch between us, allowing them to sit in their own discomfort before I finally answered. Because I wanted to see you one last time. Before we part ways permanently. Jason frowned, shifting uneasily in his seat. Part ways. I tilted my head slightly. Surely you didn't think I invited you here to fix things? To reminisce about the past. I let out a soft, amused breath. No. This is simply closure. Emily's face hardened. If this is about prom night. I leaned in, my expression unreadable. It's not about one night. It's about a lifetime of underestimation. About how you both saw me as disposable. As insignificant. I folded my hands together. But now, I'm the one sitting here with the power to decide what happens next. Jason swallowed, the reality of the situation finally settling in. Lena, look, we were kids back then. We made mistakes. I let his words hang in the air before offering a small smile. And now you're living with them. The waiter arrived, setting down an expensive bottle of wine. Neither Jason nor Emily touched their glasses. I continued, my tone calm but cutting. You see, I don't need revenge in the way you think. I don't need to ruin you. I just needed you to know that I could. I let that sink in. That's the real punishment. Living every day knowing that you were wrong. Knowing that you lost something far greater than you ever realized. Emily's nails dug into the tablecloth. So this was all just to humiliate us? I shook my head. No. This was to show you that you were never as untouchable as you thought. Jason exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, worn down from the weight of it all. What do you want from us, Lena? I stood up, smoothing down the fabric of my dress. Nothing. I met their eyes one last time. Because unlike you, I don't need validation from the past. My life is already exactly as I want it to be. I turned to leave, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Just as I reached the exit, I glanced over my shoulder. Enjoy your meal. It's on me. And with that, I walked away, leaving them behind exactly where they had always belonged. In the past. As I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of city life. The streets were aglow with the soft flicker of streetlights, their reflections dancing on the wet pavement. I paused, letting the moment sink in. Behind me, Jason and Emily remained trapped in a silence of their own making, drowning in the weight of realization. I walked towards my car, the engine purring to life with a smooth hum. Through the tinted windows, I watched the restaurant's entrance, waiting. A part of me wondered if Jason or Emily would come running out, making some last-ditch effort to plead their case. But they didn't. They wouldn't. Because deep down they finally understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. And they had lost. As I drove away, my phone vibrated beside me. A single message from an unknown number. But I knew exactly who it was. Why did you do this? I let out a quiet breath, fingers tightening on the wheel. A response wasn't necessary. He had his answer. The days following our final meeting unraveled exactly as I had expected. The media cycle continued to feast on their downfall, the internet ablaze with speculation. The elite circles they had once admired wanted nothing to do with them. Their names had become synonymous with desperation, their faces a cautionary tale. Doors that had once been slightly open slammed shut with finality. But this wasn't just about their social exile. That was simply the surface wound. The real damage was much deeper. Jason's company, once teetering on the edge of success, began to collapse under pressure. Investors sensing weakness pulled their support. Partners distanced themselves. His carefully built empire, which had always been more illusion than reality, was crumbling. No one wanted to be associated with someone whose reputation had become a liability. Emily's fall was even swifter. She had relied on connections, on the fragile belief that beauty and charm alone would secure her a place among the elite. But now the same people who had once entertained her presence barely acknowledged her. Without status, without influence, she was nothing more than an afterthought. It would have been easy to watch from a distance, to remain an unseen force orchestrating their demise. But I wanted them to feel it, to truly understand the depth of their mistake. So I sent the final message. I only did what you always thought was impossible. Jason never responded. He wouldn't. Because what could he say? He had spent years believing he had won, believing I had been nothing more than a footnote in his life. But now, standing at the edge of his downfall, he realized the truth. I had been patient. I had been methodical. And when the time had come, I had taken everything. I heard rumors about them afterward. Jason attempting to rebuild, grasping at any opportunity he could find, only to be met with closed doors. Emily retreating from the public eye, a shadow of the woman she once was. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final plea for redemption. Just the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything they had built on lies. And I moved forward. Revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about reclaiming my power, about ensuring that they could never diminish me again. And as I stood atop the empire I had built, I realized the most important truth of all. I didn't need to look back, as I had already won. The headlines had done their job. The world that Jason and Emily once thrived in had turned its back on them, shutting them out with the same ease with which they had once dismissed me. Their downfall had not been dramatic. It had been slow, agonizing, and deliberate, exactly as I had planned. Jason's company, once a promising venture, had imploded under the pressure of scrutiny. Investors withdrew and his business partners distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man whose name now carried an unmistakable stain. His desperate attempts to salvage his reputation were met with polite refusals, a few awkward smiles, and an unspoken truth. No one wanted to work with someone who had become a liability. Emily had fared no better. The same social circles that had once welcomed her with open arms now barely acknowledged her presence. The invitations stopped coming, the messages dried up, and the brand collaborations she had prided herself on disappeared overnight. She had built her image on connections, and now, with those severed, she was nothing more than a relic of a past no one wanted to remember. I had been watching them carefully, ensuring that their fall was as complete as it was irreversible. But now it was time for the final act. The invitation arrived on their doorstep on a crisp autumn morning, its gold lettering glinting in the soft light. A private event. An exclusive opportunity. One last chance. Jason was the first to react, suspicion flickering across his face as he ran his fingers over the elegant card. This has to be a trap. Emily, desperation tightening her features, snatched the invitation from his hands. What if it's not? She argued. What if this is our way back in? Jason hesitated. He wasn't naive. He knew this had my signature all over it. But the thought of fading into obscurity, of being nothing, was too much for him to bear. Against his better judgment, he agreed. The night of the event, they arrived at the venue, a towering, glass-walled mansion perched high above the city. It was breathtaking, a masterpiece of modern architecture and excess. The kind of place that whispered power in the most understated way. They stepped inside, greeted by the quiet murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a string quartet. The guests were exactly the kind of people they had once longed to be associated with. Executives, celebrities, influencers. People whose presence alone was enough to make or break a reputation. Jason adjusted his cufflinks, his confidence returning. Maybe this was it. Maybe they could still fix everything. Then they saw me. I stood near the center of the room, speaking with a group of high-profile investors, my laughter light, effortless. My presence commanded attention, the power dynamic so vastly different from the last time we had stood in the same space. Jason stiffened, his eyes meeting mine. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in them, the realization that this wasn't a chance at redemption. This was something else entirely. Emily was the first to move, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. "Lena," she breathed, forcing a smile. "You look incredible." I returned the smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Emily," I replied smoothly. "I didn't expect you to accept the invitation." Jason's jaw tightened. "We thought it might be an opportunity to clear things up." I tilted my head slightly. "Oh." Emily was quick to chime in. "Look, we get it. The past is the past. But we're willing to move forward. No hard feelings." I let the silence stretch between us, enjoying the way their confidence wavered under my gaze. Then with a small chuckle I gestured toward the room. "By all means. Enjoy the evening." They exchanged a glance, uncertain but unwilling to admit defeat. So they did as I suggested, weaving through the crowd, trying to insert themselves into conversations, attempting to reclaim the status they had lost. But something was off. Every smile directed their way was strained. Every conversation they tried to engage in fizzled before it could begin. People shifted away subtly, their interest in Jason and Emily vanishing the moment they realized who they were. Confusion set in. Emily's grip tightened around her champagne glass, her eyes darting from guest to guest. Jason's fingers clenched into a fist at his side, frustration simmering beneath the surface. And then it happened. A quiet murmur rippled through the room as a journalist, one of my carefully placed guests, casually brought up their history. "Oh, you're those two," she mused, tilting her head. "I read about you. The ones who tried to climb their way up by stepping on others." Emily's face drained of color. "That's not." "Oh, and Jason," another guest added, feigning curiosity. "Didn't your company just collapse?" "Tough break." Jason stiffened, his entire body tensing. "That's not what happened." But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The whispers grew louder, the quiet rejection turning into open disregard. And then, in the most subtle yet devastating act of all, the crowd simply moved past them. Conversations resumed, laughter echoed, and Jason and Emily were left standing there, alone, invisible, completely irrelevant. They had once thought themselves untouchable. Now they weren't even acknowledged. I approached then, my expression composed, my voice soft but firm. "You never understood, did you?" I mused. "Power isn't about stepping on people. It's about making sure that when you walk into a room you belong there." I let my gaze sweep over them. "And you don't." Jason exhaled sharply, his face a mask of barely contained anger. "You planned this." I met his stare without flinching. "I simply let the world see you for what you are." Emily shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "You wanted us to feel this." "To feel nothing." A slow smile curved my lips. "Exactly." I turned, walking away without another word. The crowd parted for me effortlessly, a silent acknowledgement of the position I now held. Jason and Emily remained frozen, surrounded yet utterly alone. I didn't need to watch them leave. I already knew they would. Jason and Emily left the gala with their heads bowed, but I knew the weight they carried was far heavier than just humiliation. It was the crushing realization that they had become the very thing they once mocked: outcast. Their presence had been erased, their relevance stripped away, and their once glorious social standing had crumbled to dust. But I wasn't done yet. I sat in my penthouse that night, sipping a glass of water, watching the cityscape through floor-to-ceiling windows. A part of me expected satisfaction, a surge of victory. But the feeling that settled over me was something different: calculated calmness. The pieces had fallen exactly where I had placed them, yet I knew the final act had yet to play out. Jason and Emily had spent their entire lives believing they were invincible, that they could manipulate and discard people without consequence. But now, for the first time, they were the ones with no options left. And when people are desperate, they become unpredictable. The next morning, my assistant knocked softly on my office door, an unusual tightness in her posture. "Lena, there's someone downstairs asking to see you." "It's Jason." I didn't react immediately, setting my pen down with a measured movement. "And Emily?" "He's alone." That was unexpected. Jason had always hidden behind Emily's influence, just as she had hidden behind his charisma. For him to come alone meant one of two things: either they had turned on each other, or he was here out of genuine desperation. I wasn't sure which amused me more. "Send him up," I said simply. Minutes later, the elevator doors slid open and Jason stepped in hesitantly. He looked different. The confident, untouchable man who had once smirked down at me on prom night was gone. In his place was someone gaunt, worn down by the weight of failure. His expensive suit, though still immaculate, couldn't mask the exhaustion in his eyes. Lena. His voice lacked its usual bravado. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit. He hesitated before obeying, his movements slow, uncertain. He placed his hands on the desk, fingers lacing together as he exhaled sharply. I need your help. The words hung in the air, heavy with irony. I tilted my head slightly. Help. Jason swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. You proved your point. You won. But Emily and I, we lost everything. The business, the connections, everything is gone. And I know you had something to do with it. A small smile played on my lips. Had something to do with it? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. You orchestrated it. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to ask if there's a way to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You want me to undo everything? His fingers clenched into a fist. I'm not asking for a miracle. Just a second chance. I tapped my nails against the glass surface of my desk, watching him carefully. Jason, tell me, why do you think you deserve one? His nostrils flared. Because people make mistakes. I nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Then I leaned forward, my voice soft yet cutting. But some mistakes don't come with do-overs. His jaw tensed, frustration flickering in his eyes. Lena, please. You got what you wanted. You destroyed us. I get it. But I'm still here trying to fix things. Doesn't that count for something? I let out a quiet breath, tilting my head as if considering. Then after a long pause I finally spoke. Let me ask you something, Jason. If I were the one sitting in your chair all those years ago, would you have given me a second chance? His silence was answer enough. I stood up, walking to the window, my arms crossed as I stared out at the city below. You never understood, did you? Power isn't something you're given. It's something you build piece by piece. And once you have it, you don't just give it away because someone suddenly regrets their choices. I turned back to face him. I didn't ruin you, Jason. You did that yourself. His shoulders sank. The last remnants of his pride crumbled in that moment, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his expression. Genuine regret. But it was too late for that. Jason exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. What happens now? I gave him a knowing look. No. You do what I had to do all those years ago. You start over. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to argue, but he knew there was no point. He had built his life on manipulation, but this time, there was no one left to manipulate. He had played the game and he had lost. He stood up slowly, nodding once. I guess that's it then. I watched as he walked toward the elevator, pausing for just a moment before stepping inside. When the doors closed, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no hatred, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once Jason was the one left standing in the rain, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. But I wasn't naive. Emily hadn't come with him, and that meant she wasn't done fighting. Unlike Jason, who crumbled under pressure, Emily was a survivor. She wouldn't go down without a final attempt to claw her way back up. And I was ready for her. Jason had left with defeat weighing on his shoulders, but I knew the battle wasn't over yet. There was still Emily. She had always been the more cunning of the two, the one who could read a room, twist a story, and play the victim when needed. While Jason had confronted me with reluctant humility, she had stayed in the shadows, plotting her next move. And that meant she wasn't finished. The next morning I received a message from an unknown number. Meet me. One last time. There was no name, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was. She had chosen a high-end rooftop lounge, the kind of place that reeked of exclusivity and old money. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, a glass of something amber in front of her, untouched. Her eyes were shaded behind oversized sunglasses, her posture relaxed, but I knew it was all an act. She was calculating, waiting for my reaction, assessing whether she still had any leverage left. I slid into the chair across from her, crossing my legs as I folded my hands neatly in my lap. You've been quiet, I noted. Emily finally removed her sunglasses, placing them on the table with deliberate precision. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I'd see in her: uncertainty. I had to think, she admitted, swirling the liquid in her glass. Had to decide if I wanted to fight or walk away. I arched an eyebrow. And her lips curved into a faint smirk. I think you already know. Of course she wouldn't walk away. Not Emily. She wasn't built for surrender. She had spent her entire life crafting the illusion of perfection, of control. And now that it was slipping away, she was desperate to cling to whatever was left. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. You're smart, Lena. I'll give you that. You played the long game and you played it well. She exhaled, tilting her head. But let's be real here. You don't want this to drag on forever. You don't want to waste any more time on us. I remained silent, letting her talk. So, she continued, what if we made a deal? A deal. I almost laughed. Even now, she was trying to negotiate, trying to find an escape route. I tilted my head slightly. What kind of deal? Her fingers tapped against the glass. You let me back in. Help me rebuild. I know people, Lena. People who can be useful to you. Her voice was smooth, persuasive. You don't have to destroy me. We can make this work. For a brief moment, I simply watched her. She truly believed she still had something to offer. That I would be tempted by the idea of keeping her around, of using her in some capacity. But what she failed to understand was that I had already won. There was nothing she could give me that I didn't already have. I leaned forward, mirroring her posture. Emily, I said softly, my voice laced with something close to amusement. You still don't get it, do you? She blinked, her confidence wavering. I smiled then, slow and deliberate. You are not a player in this game anymore. You are not an asset. You are not someone I need. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. You are irrelevant. Her breath hitched ever so slightly, but she masked it well. Till I saw it. The way her fingers tensed, the way her expression faltered for just a second. I don't need to keep you around, I continued. Because the world has already moved on. And you're just another forgotten name. For the first time she had no response. She sat there staring at me, the weight of her downfall finally crashing down around her. I stood, adjusting my coat as I grabbed my purse. Enjoy your drink, Emily, I said lightly. It might be the last time anyone serves you with any importance. I turned and walked away, leaving her there, drowning in the realization that she was truly, utterly alone. That was the last time I ever saw Emily. In the weeks that followed, the final pieces of their old lives unraveled completely. Jason attempted to recover, to build something new, but he was no longer the man people trusted. Emily faded from social circles, trying to claw her way back in, but no one had space for a woman whose relevance had expired. I, on the other hand, thrived. My name carried weight in every room I entered. My empire expanded, my influence deepened, and the past no longer held any power over me. I had taken the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, and turned it into something untouchable. One evening, as I stood in my office, gazing out at the city I now ruled, my phone buzzed with a notification. A news article. Former socialite Emily West sells off assets. Disappears from public eye. The headline didn't surprise me. It was inevitable. I stared at the screen for a moment before swiping the notification away. And just like that, she was gone. Not with a grand exit. Not with one last desperate grasp for attention. Just gone. I turned back to the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle below me. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about anger. It was about control. And I had never felt more in control than I did in that moment. I had won. And I would never look back.